Hey story enthusiasts! This is Fanfic TV bringing you another gem. In this video, we present to you, what if a goblin healer found Harry dying in the cupboard at age 2 and the Goblin Nation adopted him as their prince? If you enjoy these stories as much as we enjoy sharing them, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. The healer's discovery. The magic disturbance wasn't particularly strong, but it was persistent. Gornik had felt it tugging at his senses for weeks now, a dissonant note in the otherwise orderly symphony of magical Britain. As a goblin healer assigned to monitor unusual magical signatures that might affect Gringotts' security, he couldn't ignore it any longer. Still obsessing over that anomaly, Gornik? Nagnok asked, his voice echoing off the marble walls of the bank's medical wing. The director will think you're neglecting your real duties. Gornik's long fingers tightened around his detection amulet, the runes carved into its surface glowing faintly in response to his irritation. This is my real duty. Something's wrong. The signature is distressed. And getting weaker. It's probably just some wizard child having accidental magic outbursts. Nagnok waved a dismissive hand, his jeweled rings catching the light from the enchanted lanterns. Not our concern. But Gornik couldn't let it go. 23 years as a healer had taught him to trust his instincts, and those instincts were screaming that something was terribly wrong. The magic felt damaged. Fragile. Like a heartbeat growing fainter. I'm going to investigate, he announced, gathering his healer's bag with quick, efficient movements. Cover my shift. Nagnok's protests followed him down the hallway, but Gornik was already focused on the task ahead. The amulet had pinpointed the disturbance to a Muggle neighborhood in Surrey. Little whinging. Gornik grimaced. Venturing into Muggle areas always carried risks for his kind. Standing barely 4 feet tall with sharp features, pointed ears, and skin the color of weathered parchment, he wasn't exactly inconspicuous. Still, needs must. He slipped into his rarely used traveling cloak, pulled the hood low over his face, and headed for the apparition point. Number 4, Privet Drive looked utterly unremarkable. Identical to its neighbors with its meticulously trimmed hedges and pristine garden, it radiated bland respectability. Yet Gornik's amulet was practically vibrating in his pocket. The magical disturbance was definitely coming from inside. Night had fallen, making it easier for Gornik to move unseen, his natural goblin stealth enhanced by subtle magic that diverted Muggle attention. He circled the house, peering through windows. Through one, he saw a massive walrus of a man sprawled in front of a television. Through another, a horse-faced woman fussing over an enormous toddler who appeared to be in the midst of a tantrum, flinging toys across the room while she cooed indulgently. Nothing unusual there, except that neither child nor adults showed any sign of magical ability. Yet the signature was definitely coming from within. Gornik cast his senses wider, letting his healer's magic seek out the source. The sensation pulled him toward the cupboard under the stairs. Frowning, he moved closer to the front of the house, crouching below the windows. It was then that he heard it, a faint, rattling breath. The kind he'd heard too many times in his long career. The sound of someone barely clinging to life. Decision made, Gornik cast a quick unlocking charm on the back door and slipped inside. The house smelled of roast beef and floor polish, mundane scents that did nothing to mask the undercurrent of wrongness that permeated the air. Moving silently across the kitchen floor, he followed his senses to the small door beneath the staircase. It was locked, from the outside. With multiple locks. Something cold settled in Gornik's stomach. No good ever came from locking a door like this. He disabled the locks with a touch of his finger, goblin magic requiring no wand or incantation, and eased the door open. The stench hit him first, urine, feces, sickness, and despair. Then his eyes adjusted to the darkness, and what he saw made his ancient blood run cold. A child, a mere baby, really, lay on a filthy mattress, so still he might have thought it dead if not for the shallow rise and fall of its concave chest. The boy couldn't have been more than 2 years old, but his body was wasted, limbs like twigs, ribs sharp beneath paper-thin skin mottled with bruises. A shock of black hair stuck to a forehead slick with fever sweat. And there, cutting through the grime, a lightning-shaped scar that practically pulsed with dark magic. Kazbach! Gornik swore in gobbledygook, the curse escaping involuntarily. It cannot be. But it was. Somehow, impossibly, he was looking at Harry Potter, the boy who lived. The child whose defeat of the Dark Lord had sent shockwaves through both wizarding and goblin societies. The child who was supposed to be living in safety and luxury, protected by the most powerful light wizard of the age. The child who was, by Gornik's professional assessment, mere hours from death. Training took over where shock left him paralyzed. Gornik cast diagnostic charms, his fingers dancing through the air as runes glowed around the boy's body. The results made his stomach turn. Severe malnutrition. Dehydration. Multiple untreated broken bones. Internal bleeding. A respiratory infection gone septic. And beneath it all, something dark and parasitic clinging to the scar, draining the child's magic even as that magic desperately tried to keep him alive. No time for subtlety. No time for secrecy. Gornik pulled emergency potions from his bag, thin fingers gently lifting the boy's head. "Drink, little warrior," he murmured in English. "This will help." The child didn't respond, but his throat worked reflexively as Gornik carefully administered the potions: blood replenisher, fever reducer, a mild strengthening solution. Just enough to stabilize him for transport. Then he wrapped the tiny body in his own cloak and lifted him, so light, too light for a child his age. Gornik's decision was made before he'd even consciously considered the options. The boy needed treatment beyond what St. Mungo's could provide, especially for the dark magic in his scar. He needed goblin healing. And more than that, he needed justice. Cradling the child against his chest, Gornik turned on the spot and disappeared with a crack, leaving only a small pile of dust where the cupboard's lock had been. "What have you done?" Director Ragnar's voice cut through the frenetic activity of the healing chamber like a blade through flesh. Healers froze momentarily before returning to their work, none wanting to meet their leader's gaze. Gornik, however, straightened from where he'd been monitoring the boy's vital signs. "My job, Director. I saved a life. You've brought a human child into the heart of Gringotts, bypassing every security protocol we have." Ragnar stepped closer, his ornate armor gleaming in the chamber's lights. Despite being nearly the same height as Gornik, he somehow managed to loom. "Explain yourself before I have you sent to the deepest mines. This is Harry Potter." The words hung in the air like a physical thing. Ragnar's eyes widened, then narrowed as he moved to the floating pallet where the boy lay surrounded by healing magic. "Impossible," he breathed, but his expression said he already believed. "The wizard child is protected. Hidden. Hidden in plain sight, it seems. And protected is not the word I would use." Gornik gestured to the diagnostic runes still hovering above Harry's body. "He was dying in a cupboard, Director. Starved. Beaten. His magic nearly depleted trying to keep him alive." Ragnar studied the runes, his scowl deepening with each one he read. Though not a healer, he understood enough to grasp the severity. "Who did this?" he asked, voice dangerously soft. "His Muggle relatives, I presume. The ones with whom he was placed after his parents' murder." Gornik checked the boy's pulse, still thready, but stronger than before. "The ones Albus Dumbledore assured the Wisengamot would cherish and protect him." A low growl escaped Ragnar's throat. The goblins had no love for the chief warlock, whose policies had continued to restrict their rights and autonomy over the decades. "And the scar?" Ragnar pointed to the angry red mark, around which black veins were now visible beneath the skin. "Dark magic. Very dark. It's parasitic, feeding off his core." Gornik shook his head. "We're trying to contain it, but removing it will require ritual work beyond standard healing." Ragnar was silent for a long moment, watching as the healers continued their work. Then he turned abruptly. "My office. Now." Gornik hesitated. "Director, the boy is in capable hands. Healer Kargluk has overseen the birth of my own children. He will ensure the boy survives until your return. Ragnak was already striding toward the door. This matter has implications beyond medicine. Reluctantly, Gornik followed, pausing only to give final instructions to his colleagues. Then he hurried after Ragnak, knowing that the next few minutes would determine not only Harry Potter's fate, but possibly that of Gringotts itself. You understand what you've done? Ragnak paced behind his massive desk, carved from a single piece of obsidian and inlaid with gold. You've taken custody of the most politically significant wizard child in Britain. The boy whose location and upbringing Dumbledore himself has overseen. I've rescued an abused child who was on the verge of death. Gornik countered, standing his ground despite the intimidating setting. Ragnak's office, deep within Gringotts, was designed to impress and intimidate, walls lined with weapons and treasures, floors engraved with the history of the Goblin nation. Would you have preferred I left him to die? Don't be obtuse. Ragnak waved a dismissive hand. Of course you were right to save him. But now we must decide what comes next. The wizards will demand his return. Return him to those who nearly killed him? Or to Dumbledore, who placed him there and never checked on him? Gornik couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. That would be tantamount to murder. What do you suggest, then? That we raise a wizard child among goblins? Ragnak's laugh was sharp. The Ministry would declare war before allowing that. Gornik took a deep breath. What he was about to propose was unprecedented, but the image of that tiny broken body in the cupboard wouldn't leave him. We invoke the right of sanctuary and blood debt, he said firmly. Ragnak stopped pacing. Explain. The child was dying. I saved him, creating a life debt. More importantly, his treatment was a violation of the Treaty of 1752, which explicitly states that children of either race must be protected. Gornik leaned forward. We can legally claim guardianship on those grounds until he comes of age, or until someone can prove they would provide better care. The wizards will never accept, they'll have to, if we invoke the ancient magics. Gornik pressed his advantage. Think about it, Director. This isn't just any wizard child, this is Harry Potter. The boy who lived. The symbol of light magic's triumph. Precisely why Dumbledore will move mountains to get him back. But what if he couldn't? What if the boy himself chose to stay with us? What if we... Gornik hesitated, then committed to his most audacious idea. What if we adopted him into the nation? Made him a goblin prince? Ragnak stared, then burst into laughter that echoed off the stone walls. Now I know you've lost your mind, healer. A human goblin prince? It's been done before, Gornik argued. Centuries ago, during the Third Rebellion. A wizard child was taken in, raised as one of us. And later betrayed us to his own kind. Ragnak finished darkly. Because we treated him as an outsider, never truly accepted him. Gornik stepped closer to the desk. But what if we did it properly this time? What if Harry Potter grew up knowing both his human heritage and his goblin family? Think of the advantages. Ragnak's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Go on. A bridge between our worlds. Someone who could speak for us in the Wisengamot when he comes of age. Someone whose fame and influence could help change the laws that bind us. Gornik could see Ragnak considering it now. And on a more immediate level, the boy has a vault. Probably several. If he were raised by us, taught our ways, the Potter wealth would remain within Gringotts' management rather than being withdrawn by whatever guardian the Ministry might appoint. Ragnak finished, nodding slowly. There is strategic merit to your suggestion. And moral merit, Gornik added firmly. The boy deserves better than what the wizards gave him. A knock at the door interrupted them. Healer Kargluk entered, looking grave. The child is stabilized, he reported. But barely. The dark magic in the scar continues to resist our treatments. It's like nothing I've seen before. Can he be moved? Ragnak asked. Not for at least a week. Even then, he'll need constant care for months. His body is... Kargluk shook his head. It's a miracle he survived this long. Then we have time to decide, Ragnak said. And to prepare, if we choose the path Healer Gornick suggests. There's something else. Cargluck added hesitantly. The boy woke briefly during treatment. He spoke. Gornick stepped forward. What did he say? He asked if he was dead. When I told him no, he asked if he could stay with us, because we were nice and didn't hurt him. Cargluck's normally impassive face showed a flicker of emotion. He said his name was Freak. Silence fell over the office. Ragnar's expression hardened into something terrible to behold. Send for the ritual masters, he said finally, and the record keepers. If we're to do this, we'll do it properly. He fixed Gornick with a piercing stare. You found him, Healer. Are you prepared to be his father in our ways? Gornick hadn't expected this, hadn't thought beyond saving the child's life. But looking into Ragnar's eyes, he found his answer came without hesitation. Yes. I will raise him as my son. Ragnar nodded once, decision made. Then let us proceed, before Dumbledore realizes his precious savior is missing. The first thing Harry became aware of was that nothing hurt. This was so unusual that he lay perfectly still, afraid that any movement might bring back the familiar pain. He was lying on something soft, softer than his cupboard mattress, and warm, and the air smelled clean, like stone and metal and strange herbs. Slowly, carefully, he opened one eye. The ceiling above him was made of stone, with strange crystals embedded in it that gave off a soft, golden light. It wasn't the underside of the stairs. It wasn't any place he recognized at all. You're awake. Good. The voice made Harry flinch instinctively, curling into himself as best he could, waiting for the blow that always followed when he was caught being lazy. But no blow came. Instead, a face appeared in his field of vision, a strange face with dark eyes, pointed features, and ears that stuck out at sharp angles. No need for fear, young one. You're safe here. Harry stared, forgetting his fear in his fascination with the strange person. Was it a person? Uncle Vernon said monsters would get him if he was bad, and this might be a monster, but it didn't feel scary like monsters should. What are you? He whispered, his voice raspy from disuse. The creature person? Smiled, revealing sharp teeth that somehow didn't seem threatening. I am Gornick, a goblin healer. And you are Harry Potter, though you may not know that name. Harry frowned. Not Harry. Freak. Something flashed in the goblin's dark eyes. No. You are not Freak. You are Harry Potter, son of James and Lily Potter. And you are now under the protection of the Goblin Nation. None of this made sense to Harry's 2-year-old mind, but one part stood out. You're a goblin? Like from stories? Yes, though I suspect the stories you've heard are not entirely accurate. Gornick checked something on a glowing stone tablet beside Harry's bed. How do you feel? Harry had to think about it. No one had ever asked him that before. Don't hurt, he said finally. Hungry. That's to be expected. You've been very ill. Gornick helped him sit up slightly, adjusting pillows behind him. We'll start with some broth, and see how your stomach handles it. As if summoned by his words, another goblin appeared carrying a tray with a steaming bowl. Harry's eyes widened. He was never allowed hot food from a proper bowl. Slowly, Gornick cautioned as Harry reached eagerly for the spoon. Your body is still healing. Harry tried to obey, but the broth was the most delicious thing he'd ever tasted, rich and savory. He couldn't help gulping it down until Gornick gently took the spoon, forcing him to pace himself. Where am I? Harry asked between sips. Not cupboard? No, not the cupboard. Never again the cupboard, Gornick said firmly. You're in Gringotts, the Goblin Bank beneath London. I found you very sick and brought you here to heal you. Harry's brow furrowed as he tried to process this. Uncle Vernon? Antonia? They will never hurt you again, Gornick promised, something dangerous flickering in his expression. You're going to stay with us now. Forever? Harry couldn't believe it. Good things didn't happen to freaks. That depends on many things, Gornick said carefully. But for now, yes. You'll stay until you're well, and then, we shall see. Harry wanted to ask more questions, but exhaustion was already pulling at him, his eyelids growing heavy despite his best efforts to keep them open. "Rest, young one," Gornick said, taking the empty bowl away. "Your body needs sleep to heal. I'll be here when you wake." As Harry drifted back to sleep, a strange feeling bubbled in his chest, one he couldn't name, having so rarely experienced it. Years later, he would recognize it as hope. The next few days passed in a blur for Harry. He slept much of the time, waking only to eat increasingly substantial meals and allowed the goblin healers to perform their treatments. The dark lines around his scar slowly receded, though the mark itself remained an angry red against his pale skin. Gornick was a constant presence, explaining each procedure in simple terms that Harry could understand, never showing impatience when Harry asked questions or flinched from sudden movements. It was unlike anything Harry had experienced before. On the 5th day, when Harry was strong enough to sit up for longer periods, Gornick brought another goblin to visit, one dressed in gleaming armor with a circlet of gold around his head. "Harry, this is Director Ragnarok," Gornick explained. "He leads the Goblin Nation and Gringotts Bank." Harry stared wide-eyed at the impressive figure. "Are you a king?" Ragnarok's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Something like that, yes." "Should I bow?" Harry asked earnestly, trying to remember the proper behavior from stories he'd overheard Dudley being read. This time Ragnarok did smile, revealing pointed teeth. "That won't be necessary. In fact, if our plans proceed, others may be bowing to you someday." Harry's confusion must have shown on his face, because Gornick stepped in. "Harry, Director Ragnarok and I need to talk with you about something important. Do you feel strong enough?" Harry nodded, straightening up as best he could against his pillows, wanting to appear worthy of this serious conversation. "The people who kept you in that cupboard, who hurt you, they were supposed to be your family after your parents died," Gornick began gently. "But they failed in their duty to you. They committed crimes against you." Harry absorbed this, not entirely surprised. He'd always known he was unwanted, a burden. But hearing it confirmed as wrong still stung. "You need a new family now," Ragnarok continued, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone so fierce-looking. "One that will protect you, teach you, help you grow strong." "Like adoption?" Harry asked hesitantly. He'd heard the word when Aunt Petunia gossiped about unfortunate children in the neighborhood. "Exactly like adoption," Gornick confirmed. "But a special kind. You see, Harry, you're not just any boy. You're a wizard." Harry's jaw dropped. "A what?" "A wizard. You can do magic, like your parents could." Gornick raised his hand, and a small ball of golden light appeared above his palm. "Different from goblin magic, but magic nonetheless." "Is that why strange things happen when I'm scared?" Harry whispered, remembering the time Aunt Petunia had cut all his hair off only for it to grow back overnight, earning him a week in the cupboard. "Precisely." Ragnarok nodded approvingly. "You're powerful, even if you don't know it yet. The wizarding world, the Society of Magic Humans, thinks you're being well cared for," Gornick explained. "They don't know what happened to you. But if we send you back, you might end up with people who would use you for your fame." "I'm famous?" This was getting harder and harder for Harry to believe. "Very," Ragnarok confirmed grimly. "For something you won't remember. When you were just a baby, a very dark wizard tried to kill you, but somehow, you survived when no one else ever had. The curse rebounded and defeated him instead." Harry's small hand crept up to touch his scar. "This?" "Yes," Gornick said softly. "That mark carries dark magic still, which is part of what made you so ill. We're working to contain it." Harry tried to process all this information. Magic was real. He was a wizard. He was famous. It was too much for his young mind to fully comprehend. "What happens now?" he asked finally, his voice small. Gornick and Ragnarok exchanged glances. "We're offering you a choice, Harry Potter," Ragnarok said formally. "You can become part of the Goblin Nation. Gornick would be your father by adoption. You would learn our ways, our magic, our language. You would be a prince among us." "A prince?" Harry squeaked. You would still be human, still a wizard. Gornik added quickly. You would still learn human magic when you're older. But you would also be goblin in all the ways that matter. When you reach 11, you'll receive an invitation to attend Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, as your parents did. Ragnarok continued. By then, you'll be equipped to navigate both worlds. But your home would be with us. Would I have to go back to the cupboard? Harry asked, the fear in his voice palpable. Never. Gornik promised fiercely. Never again will you be treated that way. Harry looked between the two goblins, searching for any sign of deception or cruelty like he'd grown used to seeing in adults' faces. He found none. Instead, he saw something he'd never seen directed at him before: respect. Yes, please, he said finally. I want to stay with you. Ragnarok nodded solemnly. So be it. The ritual will take place when you've regained more strength, perhaps another week. He stood, adjusting his ornate armor. Rest well, Harry Potter. Your new life begins soon. After Ragnarok left, Harry turned to Gornik with wide eyes. Will you really be my father? Gornik sat on the edge of the bed, his expression serious. If you wish it, yes. I would be honored to call you son. Even though I'm human? Even though I was a freak? You were never a freak, Gornik said firmly. And yes, even though you're human. Different isn't wrong, Harry. The Goblin Nation has always valued strength of character over birth. You've survived things that would have broken many. That makes you worthy in our eyes. Harry didn't fully understand, but the sincerity in Gornik's voice made something warm bloom in his chest. Hesitantly, he reached out a small hand. Gornik took it, his long fingers wrapping gently around Harry's. Rest now, Gornik said. We have much to prepare, and you need your strength. As Gornik left, Harry settled back against his pillows, his mind whirling with everything he'd learned. Magic. Wizards. Goblins. A new family. It was like a dream, the kind he'd never been allowed to have in the cupboard under the stairs. For the first time in his short life, Harry Potter fell asleep without fear of what tomorrow would bring. The adoption ritual took place in the deepest chamber of Gringotts, a vast cavern illuminated by floating orbs of goblin fire that cast everything in a blue-white glow. Harry, now able to walk short distances with help, was dressed in a simple white robe embroidered with gold symbols he couldn't read. Ancient goblin script, Gornik explained as he adjusted the robe. It speaks of new beginnings and honored bloodlines. Harry nodded, too nervous to speak. Around them, goblins were making final preparations, drawing intricate patterns on the stone floor with silver powder, arranging crystal bowls at specific points, chanting in low voices that echoed eerily off the cavern walls. Are you afraid? Gornik asked gently, noticing Harry's wide eyes. A little, Harry admitted. Will it hurt? There will be a moment of discomfort when we share blood, Gornik said honestly. Goblins never lied to children, especially about important matters. But it will pass quickly, and then you'll feel different. Stronger. Harry nodded again, squaring his small shoulders. I can be brave. Gornik smiled, pride evident in his dark eyes. You already are. Director Ragnarok appeared, now dressed in ceremonial robes rather than armor, though an ornate dagger hung at his waist. It's time, he announced. Bring the child. Gornik led Harry to the center of the intricate pattern on the floor. 7 goblin elders stood at cardinal points around them, each holding a different ritual implement. Harry James Potter, Ragnarok intoned, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. You stand before the nation seeking adoption into our blood and lineage. Do you come freely, with open heart and mind? Yes, Harry said, the single word echoing. Healer Gornik of the Ironclaw clan, you stand before the nation offering blood and name to this human child. Do you do so freely, accepting all responsibilities of fatherhood under our laws? I do, Gornik replied formally. My blood to his, my knowledge to his mind, my strength to his arm, from this day until the mountains crumble. Ragnarok nodded, drawing the dagger from his belt. It gleamed strangely in the goblin firelight, the blade seeming to absorb rather than reflect the glow. "Blood given, blood taken, blood shared," Ragnar said, approaching Harry. "Your hand, child." Harry extended his right hand, trying not to tremble. Ragnar took it gently, then made a quick, shallow cut across his palm. Harry gasped but didn't pull away as his blood welled up, dripping into one of the crystal bowls. Gornik offered his hand next, receiving an identical cut. His darker blood joined Harry's in the bowl. Ragnar spoke words in gobbledygook, the harsh syllables somehow beautiful in the resonant chamber. He dipped the dagger's tip into the mingled blood, then used it to trace a symbol on Harry's forehead, carefully avoiding the lightning scar, and an identical one on Gornik's. "Drink," he commanded, offering the bowl first to Gornik, then to Harry. The blood tasted metallic and strange, but Harry managed a small sip without gagging. As soon as he swallowed, a curious warmth spread through him, starting in his stomach and radiating outward until even his fingertips tingled with it. The 7 elders began to chant, their voices rising and falling in complex patterns as they moved in a slow circle around Harry and Gornik. The silver powder on the floor began to glow, lines of light rising up to surround them in a complex web of magic. "By blood shared, by oath sworn, by magic witness," Ragnar proclaimed. "I name thee Harnack, son of Gornik, prince of the goblin nation, protected by our blades, bound by our laws, cherished by our hearts." The light intensified, becoming almost blinding. Harry, now Harnack, felt something fundamental shift inside him, as if pieces of himself were being rearranged into a new pattern. It wasn't painful, exactly, but it was profound, leaving him breathless. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light vanished. The chanting stopped. Harry blinked spots from his vision and discovered that the cut on his palm had healed completely, leaving a thin silver scar that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. "It is done," Ragnar announced. "Rise, Harnack, son of Gornik, prince of the nation." Gornik helped Harry to his feet, his expression a mixture of solemnity and joy. "My son," he said quietly, and the words carried a weight and meaning Harry had never heard before. The gathered goblins, and there were more now, Harry realized, standing in shadows beyond the ritual circle, erupted in a cheer that was more like a battle cry, stamping their feet and clashing metal against metal. "They honor you," Gornik explained. "And through you, our clan." Harry looked around at the fierce, proud faces, so different from the contemptuous or indifferent expressions he was used to seeing. These strange beings had taken him in, healed him, given him a place and a name. "Thank you," he whispered, not sure of who exactly he was thanking, Gornik, Ragnar, the Goblin Nation, or perhaps something larger than all of them. "Come," Gornik said, taking his hand. "There's a feast prepared, and then you need rest. The ritual takes much energy, especially from one still healing." As they left the chamber, Harry walking taller despite his lingering weakness, Ragnar fell into step beside them. "The wizards will discover his absence soon," he said quietly to Gornik. "Our legal position is sound, but there will be complications." "Let them come," Gornik replied, his hand tightening slightly around Harry's. "He is nation now. Anyone who wishes to take him will answer to all of us." Harry listened without fully understanding, but the protective fierceness in Gornik's voice made him feel safer than he'd ever felt before. Whatever came next, he wouldn't face it alone. The next 5 years transformed Harry Potter, now known as Harnack among the goblins, in ways no one in the wizarding world could have predicted. Physically, he changed from a malnourished, stunted child into a lean, wiry boy with quick reflexes and surprising strength for his size. Goblin healing magic had corrected the worst damage from his early years, though he remained smaller than average for a human child his age. His wild black hair was kept longer now, falling past his shoulders and often bound with silver clasps marked with clan symbols. The lightning scar remained, but the dark magic within it had been contained by goblin rituals, sealed away behind protective barriers that prevented it from influencing him. But the most profound changes were invisible to the eye. Living among goblins, Harry learned values very different from those of the wizarding world. Honor mattered more than politeness. Directness was prized over diplomacy. Strength, of body, mind, and character, earned respect, while weakness was not shameful but simply a challenge to be overcome. Again, Battlemaster Ravenclaw ordered, circling where 7-year-old Harnack stood panting, wooden practice sword in hand. Your guard dropped on the left. Harnack nodded, resuming the stance he'd been practicing for hours. His arms ached, but he didn't complain. Goblins began weapons training young, and while accommodations were made for his human physiology, no one coddled him. Better, Ravenclaw approved as Harnack executed the pattern perfectly. You learn quickly for a human. From the Battlemaster, this was high praise indeed. Harnack grinned, revealing teeth that remained stubbornly human despite 5 years of goblin blood adoption. Some physical traits had transferred. His night vision had improved dramatically, and his fingers had grown slightly longer and more dexterous, but he remained unmistakably human in appearance. Master Ravenclaw, a voice called from the entrance to the training hall. Healer Gornick requests his son's presence. Ravenclaw grunted acknowledgement. Enough for today. Clean your practice blade properly before you go. Harnack bowed respectfully, then set about oiling and storing his wooden sword. Weapon care was the first lesson any goblin child learned, and he took it seriously. Only when everything was properly stored did he hurry to find his father. Gornick was waiting in their quarters, a comfortable set of rooms deep within Gringotts, furnished with a mixture of goblin practicality and touches that accommodated Harry's human needs. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with text in both English and gobbledygook. A training dummy stood in one corner, its surface marked with anatomical targets for knife-throwing practice. Crystals embedded in the ceiling provided light that changed intensity with the time of day, mimicking the sun's patterns despite being far underground. Father, Harnack greeted, dropping easily into the formal bow used between family members. You sent for me? Yes, my son. Sit. We have matters to discuss. Gornick gestured to the low table where a simple meal was laid out, roasted meat, root vegetables, and the dark bread that goblins favored. Harnack sat cross-legged on the floor cushion, noting his father's serious expression. Is something wrong? Not wrong, precisely. Gornick poured a cup of water for each of them. But potentially complicated. Director Ragnarok received a message today from Albus Dumbledore. Harnack stiffened. He knew the name well, had studied the influential wizard's history and political positions as part of his education. Dumbledore was the one who had placed him with the Dursleys, who had never checked on his welfare there, and who had undoubtedly been searching for him since his rescue 5 years ago. What does he want? Harnack asked, trying to keep his voice neutral as goblin custom dictated when discussing potential adversaries. He's finally traced you to Gringotts. Gornick's expression remained calm, but Harnack could read the tension in the set of his shoulders. He's requesting a meeting with you and your goblin guardians, as he put it. Do I have to see him? Harnack couldn't quite keep the apprehension from his voice. Legally, no. The adoption is binding under both goblin and wizard law, thanks to the ancient treaties. Gornick sliced the bread with quick, precise movements. But politically, refusing outright would create difficulties. Director Ragnarok thinks it wiser to allow a brief, controlled meeting. Harnack nodded, processing this. Goblin education emphasized practical politics alongside combat and financial training. To demonstrate we have nothing to hide? Precisely. Gornick looked pleased at his understanding. And to establish boundaries. Dumbledore is not accustomed to being denied what he wants. This meeting will make it clear that you are under our protection, not his influence. When? Harnack asked, helping himself to the food. Next week. This gives us time to prepare you. Gornick's eyes narrowed slightly. You'll need to review wizard customs. Dumbledore will be watching for any sign that you're being treated poorly or inappropriately according to wizard standards. Harnack snorted. Unlike the standards that had me dying in a cupboard? Indeed. Gornick's smile was sharp. But perception matters in politics. You'll dress in wizard robes, speak English exclusively, and demonstrate your education in human subjects. Will I need to use a wand? Harnack asked. Though raised among goblins, he'd been training in human magic as well, without a wand, using the goblin method of channeling magic through intent and gesture rather than Latin incantations. It was harder for him than for goblin children, but he'd made solid progress. No. You're not yet of age for a wizard wand, and we won't give Dumbledore reason to claim we're circumventing their laws. Gornick took a drink of water. You'll simply need to show that you're healthy, educated, and content with your life here. That won't be difficult, Harnack said honestly. Despite the rigorous training and high expectations placed on him, life among the goblins had been everything the Dursleys' home was not: fair, structured, and filled with a fierce kind of love that never needed stating but showed in every lesson, every shared meal, every proud nod when he mastered a new skill. Good. Gornick reached across the table to clasp Harnack's forearm in the goblin gesture of solidarity. Remember, whatever happens, you are nation now. Dumbledore holds no authority over you. Harnack returned the gesture, his smaller fingers wrapping around Gornick's wiry forearm. I won't forget, Father. The meeting was set for precisely noon in one of Gringotts' upper conference rooms, neutral territory, either the wizard's domain nor the goblins' private quarters. Harnack arrived early with Gornick and Ragnak, dressed in simple but well-made dark green robes over his more comfortable goblin-style tunic and trousers. His long hair was neatly bound, his lightning scar visible on his forehead, a deliberate choice, as Gornick had explained. Let him see what he expects to see, his father had advised. It will put him at ease, make him less likely to push too hard. Harnack nodded, fighting the urge to fidget as they waited. 5 years among goblins had taught him the value of stillness, of conserving energy until it was needed, but human habits died hard. The door opened precisely at noon, and 3 wizards entered, an elderly man with a long silver beard, wearing robes of deep purple spangled with stars, a stern-looking woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun, and a sallow man dressed all in black, whose gaze fixed immediately on Harnack with an intensity that was almost physical. Director Ragnak, the elderly wizard said, bowing slightly. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I am Albus Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts. These are my colleagues, Professors Minerva McGonagall and Severus Snape. Ragnak inclined his head the minimum amount politeness required. Headmaster. You know Healer Gornick, I believe, from your correspondence. And this is Harnack, son of Gornick, Prince of the Nation. Dumbledore's eyes, bright blue behind half-moon spectacles, fixed on Harnack with a twinkle that didn't quite mask the calculation behind it. Harry, my boy. It's wonderful to see you safe and well. Thank you, Headmaster Dumbledore. Harnack replied in careful English, using the goblin conference posture, back straight, hands visible on the table, expression neutral. I prefer to be called Harnack now, though. Something flickered in Dumbledore's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or concern, but his grandfatherly smile never wavered. Of course, my apologies. Harnack. You look very different from when I saw you last. I would hope so, Gornick said dryly. He was 15 months old then, I believe. And half dead when I found him 5 years ago. The female professor, McGonagall, inhaled sharply. Half dead? Albus, you said there had been some concerns about his treatment, not that he was. Perhaps we should all be seated. Dumbledore interrupted smoothly, gesturing to the chairs. We have much to discuss. Once everyone was settled, Ragnak spoke, his tone formal. Let us be clear about the purpose of this meeting, Headmaster. You requested visual confirmation of Harry Potter's well-being. You have now seen him. Is there anything else? I had hoped for a somewhat more thorough discussion, Dumbledore said, still smiling though his eyes had lost their twinkle. Harry, forgive me, Harnack, is a wizard child of significant importance to our world. His upbringing and education are matters of legitimate interest to the wizarding authorities. His upbringing and education were matters of legitimate interest 5 years ago as well, Gornick countered. Yet no wizarding authority investigated when he lay dying of abuse and neglect in the home where you placed him. The dark-robed wizard, Snape, spoke for the first time, his voice silky but cold. Dying? Surely that's an exaggeration. Potter's relatives may not have been overly affectionate, but I was a healer long before your grandparents were born, wizard. Gornick cut him off. When I found Harnack, he had multiple untreated broken bones, severe malnutrition, and internal bleeding. His magical core was nearly depleted trying to keep him alive. Another day, perhaps two, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. McGonagall had gone pale. Albus, is this true? The monitoring charms detected nothing amiss, Dumbledore said, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice now. Though they were calibrated for magical threats, not domestic concerns. A curious oversight, Ragnock observed coldly. Particularly given that young Harnack was supposedly hidden among muggles for his protection. Harnack watched the exchange silently, as he'd been instructed. This part of the meeting wasn't really about him. It was about establishing the goblin's moral authority in the situation, undermining Dumbledore's position before he could make any demands. What matters now is ensuring Harry has the proper upbringing moving forward, Dumbledore said, clearly trying to regain control of the conversation. While I appreciate the Goblin Nation's intervention in a troubling situation, surely we can agree that a wizard child belongs in wizarding society, learning wizarding ways. Do you suggest there's some deficiency in his current education? Gornick challenged. Dumbledore hesitated, clearly aware he was on dangerous ground. Not deficiency, precisely. But there are aspects of wizard heritage and culture that are essential to his future role. I'm learning about wizard heritage and culture. Harnack interjected, unable to stay silent any longer. All eyes turned to him. Father has ensured I study both goblin and wizard history, law, and customs. I practice human magic as well as learning goblin methods. I read wizard literature and newspapers. I'm not isolated from my human heritage. Dumbledore studied him with renewed interest. And your magic, Harry, Harnack? Have you shown accidental magic? Do you feel it developing properly? My magic is strong, Harnack said simply. The healers monitor it regularly. The damage from before has been repaired. I see, Dumbledore murmured, though his expression suggested he had far more questions. And your accommodations here? Are they comfortable for a growing boy? Harnack understood what the old wizard was really asking. Were the goblins treating him well, or was he a prisoner or political pawn? I have my own room in my father's quarters, he said. I have books, toys, space to practice both magic and physical training. I eat well. I have friends among the goblin children. I am happy here. Friends. Yes. But what of human friends? McGonagall asked, her concern seeming genuine. Children your own age and kind? I visit the surface regularly, Harnack replied, using the goblin term for trips into the non-Gringotts world. I interact with human children in controlled settings. I'm not isolated. This was stretching the truth somewhat. His interactions with human children were limited to occasional observation trips to wizarding locations like Diagon Alley, always heavily disguised and guarded. But he didn't feel the lack keenly. Goblin children made loyal playmates once you earned their respect, which he had done through shared training and a willingness to learn their ways. The boy's education and socialization are balanced, Gornick stated firmly. He learns what he needs from both worlds. And when it comes time for Hogwarts? Snape asked suddenly. Will he be permitted to attend? Or does the Goblin Nation intend to keep their prince away from wizard influence entirely? Ragnock and Gornick exchanged glances. Harnack will receive his Hogwarts letter when he turns 11, as is his birthright, Ragnock said carefully. Whether he chooses to attend will be his decision, made with the guidance of his father and the nation. I want to go, Harnack said, having discussed this extensively with Gornick. I want to learn wand magic properly. But Gringotts will remain my home during holidays. Dumbledore's expression brightened. Excellent! That seems a most reasonable arrangement. He leaned forward slightly. And perhaps, before then, we might arrange some preparatory visits? Meetings with other wizard children who will be his classmates. Professor McGonagall here would be happy to. We will consider appropriate socialization opportunities as the time approaches. Gornick interrupted. For now, Harnack's schedule is quite full with his current studies. Dumbledore looked as if he wanted to push further, but Ragnock stood, signaling the end of the meeting. You have seen the boy. You have confirmed he is healthy, educated, and content. Your legitimate concerns have been addressed. The director's tone made it clear there was nothing more to discuss. Hogwarts will see him in 4 years, headmaster. Dumbledore rose as well, the others following suit. Of course. Thank you for your time, Director, Healer Gornick. He turned to Harnack with that grandfatherly smile again. And you, my boy. I look forward to welcoming you to Hogwarts when the time comes. As the wizards were escorted out by goblin guards, Harnack let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That went, okay? Gornick's expression was thoughtful. Better than expected. Dumbledore clearly didn't anticipate finding you so well-adjusted and articulate. It weakened his position considerably. He'll try other approaches. Ragnock predicted. The man has too many plans involving you to surrender his influence so easily. But legally, our position remains unassailable. What did Professor Snape have against me? Harnack asked, remembering the dark wizard's cold scrutiny. He looked at me like I'd personally offended him. Gornick and Ragnock exchanged another glance. There is history there, Gornick said carefully. Something to do with your birth father, I believe. We'll discuss it when you're older. Harnack nodded, accepting this. Goblins believed in giving children truth, but also in ensuring they were ready to understand it. What happens now? He asked as they left the conference room. No, Gornick said, clasping his shoulder. We continue as before. You learn. You grow. You prepare. The wizarding world will still be there when you're ready for it. Harnack nodded, feeling a curious mixture of relief and anticipation. The meeting had made his dual heritage seem more real somehow. He was both goblin prince and wizard child, with feet in two worlds that rarely understood each other. It would not be an easy path to walk, but as his father had taught him, the most valuable metals required the hottest fires to forge. I'm ready, he said, straightening his shoulders in the goblin warrior stance. Gornick's eyes gleamed with pride. I know you are, my son. I know you are. The next 4 years passed in a blur of intensive education, as the goblins redoubled their efforts to prepare Harnack for his eventual entry into the wizarding world. His days followed a rigorous schedule that would have exhausted most children, but which he embraced with determination. Mornings began with physical training, goblin martial arts adapted for his human physiology, weapons practice with wooden replicas of sword and dagger, and exercises to improve his speed and reflexes. Goblins prized agility over brute strength, an approach that suited Harnack's lean build perfectly. Your advantages are speed and surprise, Battlemaster Ravenclaw instructed during one grueling session as Harnack, now 10, faced off against a goblin opponent 2 years his senior. Wizards rely on wands and forget their bodies can be weapons too. Harnack nodded, circling his opponent warily. When the older goblin lunged, Harnack sidestepped, using the goblin's momentum against him to send him tumbling across the practice mats. It was a move he'd practiced hundreds of times, refined until it was nearly instinctive. Good. Ravenclaw approved. Again, but faster this time. After physical training came academic studies, goblin subjects in the morning, wizard subjects in the afternoon. He learned gobbledygook until he was as fluent as any native speaker, studied goblin history and culture, and mastered the complexities of goblin mathematics and accounting, which far surpassed wizard methods in sophistication. Finance is power. His tutor Steel Grip explained. Understanding gold is understanding the true underpinnings of both wizard and goblin politics. The wizard portion of his education was equally thorough. Human tutors, bound by magical contracts of secrecy, were brought in to teach him wizard history, far different from the goblin version of the same events, literature, etiquette, and the theory of wand-based magic. While he couldn't legally practice with a wand until he turned 11, he devoured magical theory with an enthusiasm that impressed even his goblin teachers. "The boy has a natural affinity for defensive magic," reported Mistress Wenlock, a retired Hogwarts professor now working as his private tutor. "His theoretical understanding of shield charms is remarkable for his age. He'll need those defenses," Gornik observed grimly. The Goblin Nation had extensive intelligence networks in the wizard world, and the reports suggested that despite Dumbledore's outward acceptance of their guardianship, machinations continued behind the scenes. Evenings brought more specialized training, goblin magic, which Harnack had a unique talent for despite his human blood. Unlike wizard magic with its emphasis on wands and incantations, goblin magic focused on intent, precision, and the intrinsic properties of materials. It was subtle, difficult magic that required immense concentration, but Harnack applied himself with determination. "Again," instructed Elder Grimclaw, watching as Harnack attempted to infuse a simple silver coin with a warming charm. "Focus your intent through your fingertips, not your palm. Precision, not power." Harnack nodded, sweat beading on his forehead as he tried again. This time, the coin glowed faintly red, heating just enough to be noticeable without melting. It was exhausting work, but the smile that broke across his face when he succeeded was worth the effort. "Acceptable," Grimclaw said, which from him was high praise indeed. "You progress faster than expected for one not born to our blood." Though the adoption ritual had given Harnack some goblin traits, enhanced night vision, slightly sharper teeth, and a natural affinity for metalwork, his magic remained fundamentally human in nature. Yet the blending of traditions gave him unique insights that neither pure wizard nor pure goblin students possessed. Between his studies, Harnack found moments for friendship and relaxation. While goblin children were initially wary of the human in their midst, his adoption as a prince of the nation and his willingness to work twice as hard as anyone else eventually earned their respect, if not always their easy camaraderie. His closest friend became Gornik's nephew, Grip Hook, a goblin a few years his senior who found Harnack's unique perspective fascinating. They spent hours exploring the deeper tunnels of Gringotts, practicing knife throwing in the training halls, or discussing the differences between goblin and wizard culture. "So they just wave wands and say nonsense words?" Grip Hook asked incredulously as they sat in one of Gringotts' many small gardens, magical crystals providing light for the rare plants grown there. "No understanding of the material properties or magical resonances?" "Most don't," Harnack confirmed, munching on a pastry filched from the kitchens. "My tutors say that's why wizard-made objects don't last like goblin-made ones. They impose magic instead of working with the inherent properties." Griphook shook his head. "Inefficient. Wasteful. But powerful in its way," Harnack pointed out fairly. "What wizards lack in finesse, they make up for in raw output." These discussions helped Harnack integrate the two halves of his education, finding connections and contradictions that he filed away for future consideration. It was, he realized, exactly what Gornik and Ragnarok had intended, for him to understand both worlds without being fully claimed by either. As his 11th birthday approached, the preparations intensified. Legal documents were reviewed, contingency plans established, and long discussions held about his eventual attendance at Hogwarts. "You will face challenges there beyond academics," Ragnarok warned during one such meeting in his private chambers. "You will be Harry Potter to them, the boy who lived, not Harnack, Prince of the Nation." "I understand, Director," Harnack replied seriously. "They'll have expectations I can't possibly meet. And prejudices against our kind," Gornik added. "Many will not understand or accept your connection to us. Some will actively despise it." Harnack nodded. His education had included extensive study of wizard-goblin relations, the rebellions, the restrictive treaties, the ongoing discrimination. He harbored no illusions about the reception he might receive. "What matters is remembering who you are," Ragnarok continued. "You are both wizard and goblin now. Neither half diminishes the other. My loyalty remains with the nation," Harnack assured them. It was true, despite his curiosity about the wizarding world, his deepest allegiance was to those who had saved him, raised him, made him part of their family when his own blood had rejected him. As does our loyalty to you, Gornick said, pride evident in his voice. Whatever happens at Hogwarts, you will always have a home here. The night before his 11th birthday, Harnack sat cross-legged on the floor of his room, surrounded by his most prized possessions, a silver dagger gifted to him by Ragnarok on his 7th birthday, a set of practice-throwing knives, books in both English and gobbledygook, a small chest of semi-precious stones he was learning to enchant, and a pendant containing a magical photograph of Gornick and himself, taken when he was 6. Tomorrow, his Hogwarts letter would arrive. Tomorrow, the path that would take him back into the wizarding world would begin in earnest. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, in the quiet of his room deep beneath London, Harnack, son of Gornick, prince of goblins and wizard child, heir to 2 traditions and belonging fully to either, polished his silver dagger with steady hands and calm heart, ready for whatever the future might bring. Chapter 2, Prince of 2 Worlds. The letter arrived precisely at dawn on Harnack's 11th birthday, carried by a confused-looking barn owl that had somehow navigated the labyrinthine security of Gringotts only to be intercepted by goblin guards at the residential level. Persistent creature, the guard commented, handing the sealed envelope to Gornick. Tried 3 different entrances before finding one it could access. Gornick examined the emerald green ink on heavy parchment, the wax seal bearing the Hogwarts crest. Wizard magic. Powerful, if inelegant. He passed the letter to his son, who had been waiting patiently. Your heritage calls to you, Harnack. The boy, no longer small and fragile but lean and wiry with hard-earned muscle, accepted the envelope with a solemn nod. Though his outward demeanor remained calm, the goblin-trained composure he'd perfected over 9 years, his eyes betrayed his excitement. Would you like privacy? Gornick asked. Harnack shook his head. No need. This belongs to both of us. He broke the seal with a practiced flick of his thumb and unfolded the parchment inside. Text: Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry Headmaster, Albus Dumbledore, Order of Merlin, First Class, Grand Source, CHF, Warlock, Supreme Mugwump, International Confeed of Wizards. Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of all necessary books and equipment. Term begins on September 1st. We await your owl by no later than July 31st. Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. They still call me Potter, Harnack observed, running his finger over the name. Not son of Gornick. To be expected, Gornick replied. The blood adoption is recognized under goblin law and the ancient treaties, but wizard bureaucracy follows its own paths. He glanced at the supply list. We have anticipated most of these requirements. The wand, however. I'll need to visit Ollivander's, Harnack finished. They'd discussed this extensively. While he could function quite effectively with goblin magic, which required no wand, formal wizard education demanded one. I'm ready. Gornick studied his son's face. The scrawny, frightened child he'd rescued from the cupboard had grown into something unique. Not quite wizard, not quite goblin, but a bridge between worlds that desperately needed bridging. His human features had matured, the lightning scar still visible but no longer angry red, thanks to the containment rituals. His black hair, now reaching the middle of his back, was bound in the traditional style of a goblin warrior in training, with silver and copper clips denoting his clan status. You are ready, Gornick agreed. Director Ragnarok has arranged an escort for your visit to Diagon Alley tomorrow. Your first public appearance as both Harry Potter and Harnack's son of Gornick. He clasped his son's shoulder firmly. Remember your training. Harnack nodded, squaring his shoulders instinctively. I represent the nation. I will bring honor to our name. And to your own, Gornick added softly. The training that had prepared Harnack for this moment began in earnest when he was 7, recovered enough from his early trauma to begin formal education. The goblin approach to childhood was vastly different from what most wizard children experienced, less protective, more practical, with clear expectations and consequences. Again, Elder Gornkill instructed, watching as 7-year-old Harnack painstakingly traced goblin runes into a clay tablet. Your strokes lack precision. In goblin writing, a millimeter's difference can change a blessing to a curse. Harnack nodded seriously, wiping his tablet clean and starting over. Unlike human children who might have complained about the repetitive task, he understood its importance. Goblin education valued mastery above all else, not mere competence, but true, deep understanding. His days followed a structured rhythm. Mornings for physical training, necessary for a human body to withstand the rigors of goblin life. Midday for academic studies, reading and writing in both gobbledygook and English, mathematics far more advanced than human schools would teach at his age, history from both goblin and wizard perspectives. Evenings for practical skills, metalwork, basic healing, the fundamentals of finance and accounting. Balance the sheet again, Master Silvertooth demanded, placing another ledger before Harnack. Find the discrepancy. Harnack bent over the column of numbers, his young mind working methodically through calculations that would challenge many adult wizards. 3 galleons, 14 sickles missing from the quarterly interest, he announced after several minutes of intense concentration. Hidden in the conversion rates. Silvertooth's eyebrows rose slightly. Impressive. Most would have overlooked that. You have your father's eye for detail. The praise, rare and therefore precious, warmed Harnack more than effusive compliments ever could. Goblins did not believe in false encouragement. Praise was earned, never given freely. Between lessons, he explored the vast complex of Gringotts, learning its secrets under the watchful eyes of his assigned guards. The bank that wizards saw was merely the tip of a massive underground city, living quarters, forges, gardens lit by enchanted crystals, libraries containing knowledge from centuries past. Why don't wizards know about all this? He asked Griphook one day as they peered into a massive cavern where stalactites had been carved into the semblance of past goblin kings. Would you show the full extent of your wealth and knowledge to those who have historically tried to subjugate you? Griphook countered. Wizards see what we allow them to see. It was a perspective Harnack heard often, the justified caution of a people who had faced centuries of oppression and restriction. Yet in his unique position, straddling both worlds, he sometimes wondered if the secrecy served to perpetuate misunderstandings rather than prevent them. His dual nature became increasingly apparent as he grew older. By age 8, his goblin magic had developed impressively. He could warm metals with a touch, sense the composition of alloys, and perform basic healing for minor injuries. Yet his wizard magic remained wild and unpredictable, manifesting in bursts of accidental power that both fascinated and concerned his goblin family. Focus, Harnack, Healer Thornfinger instructed during one particularly challenging lesson. Your wizard magic resists the structured approach of our traditions. You must find the balance between intent and restraint. Harnack's face screwed up in concentration as he tried to channel his magic into a small copper disc, attempting to enchant it with a simple light charm. Instead, the disc shot into the air and spun wildly, emitting sparks before clattering back to the table. Too much power, too little direction, Thornfinger observed without judgment. This is why wizards use wands, to constrain and direct their more chaotic energies. Father says I can't have a wand until I'm 11, Harnack said, frustrated by his failure. And he is correct. Wizard law forbids it, and we must respect that boundary for now. Thornfinger's long fingers adjusted Harnack's hand position slightly. But there are other ways to develop control. Again, with less force this time. These lessons in controlling his dual magical nature often left Harnack exhausted but determined. The goblin's matter-of-fact approach to his struggles, either condemning his failures nor excusing them because of his youth, taught him resilience and perseverance. As he approached his 9th birthday, another facet of his education began, preparation for his eventual return to the wizarding world. You must understand what you represent to them, Director Ragnock explained during a private audience in his chambers. To wizards, you are not simply Harry Potter. You are a symbol, a legend, a political entity. Because I supposedly defeated Voldemort as a baby, Harnack said, using the name without fear as the goblins did. They had no patience for the wizarding superstition of he who must not be named. Precisely. A feat that should have been impossible, accomplished by an infant with no training or particular power. Ragnar's shrewd eyes studied him. What does that tell you? Harnack considered carefully before answering, knowing this was a test. That something else was at work. Something neither side fully understands. Correct. And in the absence of understanding, people create narratives that serve their purposes. Ragnar gestured to a stack of wizard newspapers and books the Goblin Intelligence Division had collected. To some, you are a savior, destined to lead the light. To others, you are a threat to their power or beliefs. Harnack scanned the headlines with growing discomfort. The boy who vanished, 5 years without a trace. Potter heir missing, Dumbledore assures public all is well. Department of Magical Law Enforcement denies Special Task Force searching for Potter. They're looking for me, he said quietly. They have been searching since the night healer Gornik brought you to us, Ragnar confirmed. Discreetly at first, then with increasing urgency as years passed with no sign of you. His sharp teeth gleamed in a mirthless smile. They have searched everywhere except beneath their very feet. The irony wasn't lost on Harnack, that the most famous child in wizarding Britain had been hidden in plain sight, and the bank wizards visited daily without ever truly seeing. What happens when they find out where I've been? That I'm not what they expected. There will be outrage. Demands? Political maneuvering. Ragnar's voice was matter-of-fact. Some will claim we kidnapped you. Others will seek to rescue you from our influence. The ministry may attempt legal challenges to our guardianship. Harnack felt a chill of fear. Could they take me away? No. The word was spoken with absolute certainty. The blood adoption is binding under the oldest magical laws, predating even the ministry itself. You are goblin now as well as wizard. More importantly, Ragnar's expression softened almost imperceptibly. You are nation. And the nation protects its own. The reassurance steadied Harnack, reminding him that though he stood between two worlds, he had a place where he truly belonged. His education intensified as his 10th year approached. Now old enough to grasp more complex concepts, he received lessons in goblin and wizard politics, the nuances of treaties that governed relations between magical races, and the realities of prejudice he would face. Again, Battle Master Ravenclaw ordered, circling as Harnack practiced defensive maneuvers with a wooden practice sword. A wizard will underestimate your physical abilities. Use that arrogance against them. Harnack executed the move perfectly this time, a complex sequence that ended with his opponent, an older goblin youth, disarmed and on his back. Better. Ravenclaw approved. Remember, in the wizarding world, you will face threats from multiple directions. Some obvious, some disguised as friendship or concern. Your body must be as prepared as your mind. These warnings were reinforced by Gornik, who ensured his son understood exactly what awaited him at Hogwarts. There will be those who worship the image of Harry Potter without knowing the real you, he explained during one of their evening talks. Others who resent you for your fame. Some who will hate you simply for your connection to us. And Dumbledore? Harnack asked. The headmaster's name had become frequent in their discussions since the meeting 4 years prior. Gornik's expression darkened slightly. Dumbledore plays a long game. He sees people as pieces in a grand strategy. He placed you with those muggles for his own reasons, and those reasons likely still guide his actions. Do you think he knew about how they treated me? It was a question Harnack had wondered about for years, one that grew more pointed as his understanding of the wizard world expanded. I believe he knew they would not love you, Gornik said carefully. Whether he anticipated the extent of their abuse, I cannot say. But he certainly failed to verify your welfare, despite his responsibilities to you. Harnack nodded thoughtfully. The goblins had taught him to judge people by their actions rather than their words, and Dumbledore's actions spoke volumes. There's something else you should know, Gornik continued, his tone shifting. Something about your wizard inheritance. Harnack straightened, sensing important information coming. While the goblins had been forthright about most aspects of his past, they parceled out certain details as he became ready to process them. The Potter family is an ancient and wealthy one, Gornick explained. As the last of your line, you stand to inherit not only substantial financial assets, but also seats on governing bodies, properties, and magical artifacts. How substantial? Harnack asked, his goblin-trained mind immediately calculating possibilities. Among the top 10 wizard fortunes in Britain, Gornick said. Not as vast as the Malfoy or Black estates, but significant nonetheless. The exact figures have been kept private since your parents' deaths, with only limited access granted to your magical guardian. Dumbledore, Harnack guessed. Correct. Though his access should have been restricted to educational trust funds, not the main family vaults. Gornick's expression was unreadable. When you enter Hogwarts, we can begin the process of transferring full control to you, under Goblin oversight as is your right as a member of the nation. The implications were clear. His return to the wizarding world wouldn't just be a cultural adjustment, but a financial and political one as well. The wealth and influence of House Potter would shift from Dumbledore's indirect control to that of a goblin-raised heir, a change certain to cause ripples through wizard society. I'll need to learn more about Potter family history, Harnack said decisively. And wizard inheritance laws. Gornick nodded, pleased by his son's practical response. I've already arranged for appropriate tutors. Your lessons begin next week. The news of Harry Potter's whereabouts broke 3 months before his 11th birthday, sending shockwaves through wizarding Britain. The Daily Prophet's headline screamed across the front page, Boy W. Cho lived found, Harry Potter alive and well in Goblin custody. The article beneath contained few concrete details. The Goblins had released only a terse statement confirming that Harry Potter resided under Goblin protection following his rescue from life-threatening abuse at his previous residence. But the lack of information only fueled wild speculation and debate. Did you see this? Griphook asked, tossing a copy of the newspaper onto the table where Harnack was studying a complex runic array. The wizard world is in an uproar over you. Harnack scanned the article, noting the careful wording of the Goblin statement, and the far more inflammatory commentary from the reporter. Questions remain about the Goblin nation's right to custody of Britain's hero child. He read aloud, voice tinged with irony. Concerns have been raised about the appropriateness of a human child being raised in the notoriously secretive and martial Goblin culture. They make it sound like we've been training you as a weapon. Griphook snorted. Haven't you? Harnack replied with a wry smile, twirling one of his practiced daggers between his fingers with casual expertise. Both laughed, but underneath the humor lay real tension. The public revelation had been strategically timed by Director Ragnarok, early enough before Harnack's Hogwarts attendance to let the initial shock dissipate, but late enough that the wizarding authorities would have limited time to mount legal challenges to the arrangement. The fallout was immediate and intense. The Ministry of Magic formally requested a meeting with Goblin leadership. Dumbledore issued a carefully worded statement expressing relief that young Harry is safe, while hinting at concerns about his upbringing. Parents of Hogwarts students sent howlers demanding assurances that their children wouldn't be endangered by having a Goblin-influenced Harry Potter among them. Through it all, Harnack maintained the composed exterior his Goblin upbringing had instilled, even as privately he absorbed every newspaper article, every wireless broadcast, every rumor that Gringotts intelligence gathered about the wizard world's reaction to him. They fear what they don't understand, Gornick observed, finding his son poring over the latest stack of clippings. And they understand very little about us, or you. Some seem to think I'll arrive at Hogwarts carrying battle axes and speaking only gobbledygook, Harnack said, pointing to a particularly hysterical letter to the editor. And will you disappoint them by arriving as a perfectly ordinary wizard child? Gornick asked with a raised eyebrow. Harnack grinned, showing teeth that had grown just slightly sharper than human standard. Where would the fun be in that? The bravado masked genuine anxiety, however. As the day of his formal introduction to wizard society approached, Harnack found himself spending more time in quiet reflection, mentally preparing for the challenges ahead. Gornik found him one evening in the small chamber that served as their family shrine, a space dedicated to goblin ancestors and, in Harnack's case, to the human parents he could barely remember. A magical photograph of James and Lily Potter, obtained through goblin contacts, sat alongside artifacts of Gornik's lineage. "Seeking guidance?" Gornik asked softly, entering the sacred space. Harnack nodded, eyes still fixed on his parents' smiling faces. "Wondering what they would think. Of me. Of all this." Gornik sat beside his son, his normally gruff demeanor softening. "I never knew your birth parents, but I know this: they died protecting you. They valued your life above their own. The goblins have an expression," Harnack said quietly. "The true measure of a parent is not in the child's birth, but in their ascension." "Indeed." Gornik placed a hand on Harnack's shoulder. "Your human parents gave you life and sacrifice to preserve it. I have done my best to help you ascend, to become someone worthy of both your heritages. I don't want to disappoint either," Harnack admitted. "Not them. Not you. Not the nation. You carry a heavy burden for one so young," Gornik acknowledged. "But remember what I taught you when you first began weapons training. The heaviest blade becomes light with proper balance," Harnack recited. "Find your balance, my son. Between human and goblin. Between your past and your future." Gornik's eyes gleamed with pride and something deeper, love, expressed in the restrained goblin manner. "You honor all your parents by becoming truly yourself." The moment of vulnerability passed, and Harnack straightened, composure returning. Yet something had settled within him, a quiet confidence that would prove essential in the days to come. The formal meeting between ministry officials and the goblin leadership regarding Harry Potter's status was scheduled for the last week of July, a date that left little time for legal maneuvering before the Hogwarts term began. This timing was, of course, deliberate on the goblin's part. "You'll attend," Director Ragnarok informed Harnack the day before. "It's time the wizard authorities saw you for themselves, rather than continuing to build their fantasies and fears." The meeting would take place in Gringotts' Grand Conference Chamber, a space rarely seen by wizards, with soaring ceilings of carved stone and walls decorated with goblin battle honors. The location itself was a statement. This discussion would happen on goblin terms, on goblin territory. Harnack spent the morning preparing meticulously. He dressed in formal robes that blended wizard and goblin styles, black with silver embroidery that incorporated both Potter family symbols and goblin clan markings. His hair was bound in the traditional style of a goblin prince apparent, with silver clasps that marked his status. At his waist, visible but not prominently displayed, hung a ceremonial dagger, his right as both a goblin warrior in training and heir to an ancient wizard house. "Remember," Gornik said as they prepared to enter the chamber, "let them see both aspects of who you are. Neither apologize for your goblin upbringing nor reject your wizard heritage." Harnack nodded, taking a deep breath to center himself as the massive doors swung open. The wizarding delegation had already arrived, an impressive array of power and influence. Minister for Magic Cornelius Fudge, looking nervous and frequently mopping his brow with a handkerchief. Albus Dumbledore, his expression serene but eyes sharp behind half-moon spectacles. Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, her monocle glinting as she surveyed the chamber. Several members of the Wisengamot, including a tall, aristocratic blond man whom Harnack immediately recognized as Lucius Malfoy from his intelligence briefings. On the goblin side stood Director Ragnarok, flanked by senior members of the Gringotts administration and 2 goblin lawyers specializing in wizard-goblin treaty law. All eyes turned to Harnack as he entered alongside Gornik. He felt the weight of their scrutiny, some curious, some calculating, some openly hostile. Drawing on years of training, he kept his expression neutral and his posture straight as he took his place at Ragnarok's right hand. "Gentlemen, Madam Bones," Ragnarok began without preamble. "Thank you for accepting our invitation to discuss the status of Harnack, son of Gornik, known to you as Harry Potter." "Harnack?" Fudge repeated, looking confused. "What's this about?" "We're here about Harry Potter." "They've changed his name," Malfoy murmured, loud enough to be heard. How presumptuous. Ragnar's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Harnack is his name within the nation, following his formal blood adoption by Healer Gornick. He retains the name Harry James Potter for legal purposes within Wizarding Society. Blood adoption? Amelia Bones leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. That's ancient magic. Rarely practiced these days. The Goblin Nation preserves many traditions wizards have abandoned. Ragnar replied smoothly. The adoption was performed in accordance with the Treaty of 1752, Section 4, Paragraph 12, which specifically allows for the adoption of wizard orphans into goblin families under circumstances of abandonment or life-threatening neglect. Dumbledore spoke for the first time, his voice gentle but carrying an undercurrent of steel. I was not aware that Harry had been abandoned or neglected. He was placed with his mother's sister and her family, his only living relatives. The same relatives who kept him locked in a cupboard, starved him, and beat him until he was near death? Gornick's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. The same relatives who called him Freak instead of his name, and told him his parents died in a car crash because they were drunks. A shocked silence fell over the wizard delegation. Amelia Bones' monocle actually dropped from her eye. These are serious allegations, she said finally. They are not allegations but documented facts. Ragnar countered, gesturing to one of the goblin lawyers, who produced a sealed folder. Medical records from the night Healer Gornick found the boy. Photographic evidence of his living conditions. Diagnostic results showing long-term malnutrition and repeated injuries consistent with physical abuse. The folder was passed to Madame Bones, who opened it with a grim expression. As she reviewed the contents, her face paled visibly. Minister, these documents appear to substantiate the goblin's claims, she said quietly. The medical evidence alone is disturbing. Fudge looked distinctly uncomfortable. Well, but surely there must have been some misunderstanding. Dumbledore himself arranged the boy's placement. All eyes turned to Dumbledore, whose serene expression had faltered slightly. I placed monitoring charms on the home, he said carefully. They were designed to alert me to magical threats. They never indicated any danger to Harry. Convenient, Gornick observed coldly, that they detected nothing as my son wasted away in darkness and pain. Dumbledore's eyes flickered to Harnack, who met his gaze steadily. Harry, Harnack, I deeply regret any suffering you experienced. Had I known, you should have known. Harnack spoke for the first time, his voice clear and controlled. You placed me there. You had a responsibility to ensure my well-being. His words, spoken without emotion but with absolute conviction, seemed to hit Dumbledore physically. The old wizard actually flinched. Malfoy, watching the exchange with calculating eyes, interjected. While these revelations are certainly troubling, they don't address the central issue. The boy who lived is a wizard child of significant importance to our society. His education and upbringing should reflect that importance. Are you suggesting, Ragnar said with dangerous softness, that the Goblin Nation is incapable of providing appropriate education to a wizard child? I merely observe that there are cultural differences. Malfoy replied smoothly. Differences that might place young Harry at a disadvantage when he enters proper wizarding society. Harnack felt a surge of anger but controlled it, responding instead with the calm precision his goblin tutors had instilled. I speak and read English fluently, Lord Malfoy. I've studied wizard history, culture, and magical theory with qualified tutors. I understand the political structures of wizarding Britain and the role my family has historically played in them. He paused, letting his words sink in. I'm hardly ignorant of the world I was born into, even if I've been raised with additional perspectives. Malfoy's eyes narrowed slightly, reassessing. Impressive articulation for one so young. He conceded. But my concern stands. The Potter heir represents one of our oldest bloodlines. His place is among his own kind. I find it interesting. Harnack responded. That wizard society showed so little concern for the Potter heir when he was being systematically abused by muggles, yet expresses such passionate interest now that he's been given a home by goblins. An uncomfortable silence followed this observation. Amelia Bones cleared her throat. Legally speaking, what exactly is the boy's status? Is he considered a goblin now? A ward of Gringotts? How does this affect his standing in wizarding society? The goblin lawyer stepped forward. Harnack, son of Gornick, retains his full rights and responsibilities as Harry James Potter within wizard law. The blood adoption creates a parallel status within goblin society without diminishing his human identity. There is precedent for this dual status in the Treaty of 1752, reaffirmed in the Magical Beings Accord of 1832. But who has legal guardianship? Fudge pressed. Surely not. I mean, no offense intended, but a goblin cannot be the legal guardian of a wizard child under ministry law. Under normal ministry law, perhaps not. The lawyer agreed. But the treaties governing relations between our peoples supersede standard ministry regulations in cases like this. Furthermore, the magical blood adoption created a bond recognized by the oldest magics predating the ministry itself. Dumbledore leaned forward. What the ministry is concerned about, what we are all concerned about, is ensuring Harry's well-being and proper development. Perhaps a compromise might be reached? Joint guardianship, perhaps? Gornick's expression hardened. My son is not a diplomatic concession to be negotiated over. He was dying when I found him. I healed him, claimed him, raised him as my own. Wizard law failed to protect him. Goblin law and goblin care saved him. And we appreciate that service, Dumbledore said soothingly. But Harry, Harnack, has a destiny in our world. A role to play that extends beyond his personal circumstances. You speak of the prophecy, Harnack said quietly. The chamber went absolutely silent. Dumbledore's eyes widened in genuine shock. You know of that? He asked, voice barely above a whisper. The Goblin Nation has its own seers and its own sources, Ragnock interjected smoothly. We are aware of certain expectations placed on Harnack by Wizard Society. Fudge looked bewildered. What prophecy? Dumbledore, what is he talking about? A matter for another discussion. Dumbledore deflected quickly, though his eyes remained fixed on Harnack with new wariness. The point remains that Harry's education must prepare him for his future responsibilities. On that we agree completely, Ragnock said. Which is why Harnack will attend Hogwarts as planned, beginning this September. The relief on several wizard faces was palpable. However, Ragnock continued, he will return to Gringotts during holidays. His primary residence remains with us. His financial affairs will be managed exclusively by Gringotts, with no external oversight. And any decisions regarding his welfare must include Healer Gornick as his father by blood and magic. Fudge sputtered. But that's non-negotiable, Ragnock finished firmly. The alternative is that we challenge the Hogwarts attendance requirement entirely, educate him exclusively under Goblin supervision, and petition for his complete legal emancipation from wizard authority at age 13, as is his right under the Treaty of Silverhand. The threat hung in the air. Having Harry Potter attend Hogwarts under Goblin terms was problematic for the Ministry's authority, but having him disappear entirely from wizard education would be politically disastrous. Amelia Bones, ever the pragmatist, spoke up. These terms seem workable, given the unusual circumstances. Provided, of course, that Mr. Potter, son of Gornick, agrees to abide by Hogwarts rules while in attendance and submits to the same educational requirements as other students. All eyes turned to Harnack. I intend to excel at Hogwarts, he said simply, both for my own sake and for the honor of the nation. Dumbledore studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. Then it seems we have an understanding. Harry will attend Hogwarts as any other student, with the special provision that his holiday residence and certain legal matters remain under Goblin jurisdiction. Precisely, Ragnock confirmed. Now, shall we discuss the practical arrangements? Harnack will require access to his family vaults, which have been sealed since his parents' deaths. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, working through the complex logistics of Harnack's dual status. Throughout, he remained attentive and composed, speaking when addressed but otherwise observing the political maneuvering with the keen eye his goblin education had developed. He noticed how Dumbledore conceded smaller points to maintain control of larger ones. How Malfoy probed for weaknesses in the goblin position while maintaining a veneer of diplomatic concern. How Fudge looked to others before forming his own opinions. How Amelia Bones focused relentlessly on legal precedent rather than emotional appeals. It was, in many ways, his first practical lesson in wizard politics, valuable experience for what awaited him at Hogwarts. When the meeting finally concluded, with agreements drafted and preliminary papers signed, Dumbledore approached Harnack directly. "Might I have a private word?" he asked, with a glance toward Gornick that made it clear, private, meant without goblin presence. "Anything you wish to say to me can be said in my father's presence," Harnack replied politely but firmly. Something like disappointment flickered across Dumbledore's face. "Very well. I simply wanted to express, personally, my regret for what happened with your aunt and uncle. I truly did not know the extent of their mistreatment." Harnack studied the old wizard's face, looking for signs of deception. His goblin mentors had taught him to read micro-expressions, and while Dumbledore was clearly skilled at controlling his, there were still subtle tells. "You suspected," Harnack said finally. "Perhaps not the worst of it, but you knew they didn't love me. That they resented magic. Yet you left me there anyway." Dumbledore sighed heavily. "I had my reasons, Harry. Reasons I hope to explain to you when you're a bit older." "Blood wards," Harnack said flatly. "You needed my mother's blood protection to continue through her sister." Again, that flash of genuine surprise in the old wizard's eyes. "You are remarkably well informed. The nation values knowledge," Harnack replied. "Especially knowledge that affects its members." "I see." Dumbledore's expression became thoughtful. "You've been given a rather unusual perspective on our world, Harry. I hope you'll keep an open mind when you join us at Hogwarts. Not all wizards share the adversarial view of goblin-wizard relations that history might suggest. And I hope, Headmaster," Harnack countered, "that you'll remember I am both wizard and goblin now. My perspective isn't just unusual, it's unique. Perhaps valuable because of that uniqueness." A slow smile spread across Dumbledore's face. "Indeed it is, my boy. Indeed it is." He glanced at Gornick. "You've raised a remarkable young man, Master Gornick. James and Lily would be proud." With that, he turned and rejoined the departing wizard delegation, leaving Harnack and Gornick alone with Ragnarok. "He's trying to establish a personal connection," Ragnarok observed once the wizards were out of earshot. "To position himself as a mentor figure." "Of course he is," Gornick agreed. "Dumbledore collects people of potential influence. He'll want Harnack in his orbit, under his guidance." "And what do you think?" Ragnarok asked Harnack directly. Harnack considered the question carefully. "I think Dumbledore is accustomed to being the wisest person in any room. To having others defer to his judgment. To working toward goals only he fully understands." He paused. "But I also think he genuinely believes he's working for the greater good, whatever that means to him." "A dangerous combination," Gornick noted. "Conviction without accountability." "Yes," Harnack agreed. "But also potentially useful. Dumbledore has knowledge we need, about Voldemort, about the prophecy, about what happened the night my birth parents died." Ragnarok nodded approvingly. "A balanced assessment. Remember it when you're at Hogwarts. Dumbledore will attempt to shape your path, but your path is your own to walk." As they left the conference chamber, Harnack felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. The confrontation he'd been preparing for had come and gone. The wizarding authorities had accepted, however reluctantly, his dual status. The path to Hogwarts lay open before him. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" Gornick asked as they walked the marble corridors back toward their quarters. Tomorrow, his first venture into Diagon Alley as himself, not disguised or hidden as he had been on previous observation trips. His first public appearance as both Harry Potter and Harnack's son of Gornick. As ready as I can be, Harnack replied, squaring his shoulders unconsciously. Gornick nodded, pride evident in his eyes. Then rest well tonight, my son. Tomorrow, you begin truly walking between worlds. Diagon Alley bustled with preterm shopping activity, families crowding the narrow street as they gathered supplies for the upcoming school year. Into this ordinary scene stepped a most extraordinary party, 4 goblin guards in formal armor, Director Ragnarok himself in his official regalia, Healer Gornick in the distinctive robes of his profession, and between them, a slender boy whose appearance immediately caused heads to turn. Harnack walked with the balanced grace of goblin warrior training, his posture straight but not stiff. His black hair, bound in goblin style, reached the middle of his back. He wore robes of deep green that nodded to wizard fashion while incorporating subtle goblin design elements. And visible on his forehead, the lightning bolt scar that made him instantly recognizable to every witch and wizard in Britain. The reaction was immediate. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. People froze in place, staring openly. A child's voice piped up. "Mummy, is that Harry Potter? Why is he with the goblins?" Harnack had prepared for this scrutiny, but the reality was still jarring. He maintained his composed expression, acknowledging the stares with slight nods but continuing purposefully toward their first destination, Ollivander's. As they walked, whispers followed. "It's true then, what the prophet said. Raised by goblins, can you imagine? Looks healthy enough though, doesn't he? But why is he dressed like that? And his hair? They say he speaks their language, thinks he's one of them." Gornick placed a supportive hand on his son's shoulder, murmuring in gobbledygook, "Remember your training. Their opinions matter only as much as you allow them to." Harnack nodded imperceptibly, keeping his focus on their destination. The narrow shop front of Ollivander's loomed ahead, ancient and somewhat dusty compared to its neighbors. Inside, the shop was empty of customers, dim light filtering through dirty windows to illuminate thousands of narrow boxes stacked from floor to ceiling. The air tasted of dust and something else, magic, old and expectant. "I wondered when I'd be seeing you, Mr. Potter." The voice came from the shadows, causing the goblin guards to tense and place hands on weapons. An old man with pale, moon-like eyes stepped forward, studying Harnack with undisguised fascination. "Ollivander," Ragnarok acknowledged with a slight nod. "We require a wand for Harnack's son of Gornick." "Son of Gornick," Ollivander repeated softly, his gaze flicking between Harnack and the goblin healer. "Yes, I see it now. The blood adoption has taken well. Unusual, very unusual." His attention returned fully to Harnack. "But then, I expect unusual things from you, Mr. Potter. After all, I sold the wand that gave you that scar." Harnack's interest sharpened. "Voldemort's wand? You remember it?" "I remember every wand I've ever sold," Ollivander replied. 13.5 inches. You with a phoenix feather core. Powerful wand, very powerful, and in the wrong hands." He shook his head. "But we're here for your wand, not to dwell on the past. Your wand arm, please." Harnack extended his right arm, holding still as a tape measure began taking measurements of its own accord while Ollivander disappeared among the shelves, returning with an armful of boxes. "Try this. Beechwood and dragon heartstring, 9 inches. Harnack took the offered wand, but Ollivander snatched it back almost immediately. No, that's not right. Perhaps, holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches. Again, the wand was barely in Harnack's hand before Ollivander reclaimed it, muttering to himself. The pattern continued, wand after wand rejected, until the pile of discarded boxes grew substantial. "Tricky customer," Ollivander murmured, looking more excited rather than discouraged. "But not to worry, we'll find your match. The wand chooses the wizard, you know." "And what of wizards raised by goblins?" Ragnarok inquired, his tone making it clear this was no idle question. "Does that influence the choice?" Ollivander paused, studying Ragnarok with new interest. "An excellent question, Director. The wand responds to the wizard's core self, their magic, their character, their potential. If young Mr. Potter's upbringing has shaped those elements. He trailed off, eyes distant in thought. Then, abruptly, he turned and disappeared into the very back of the shop, returning with a dusty box that looked older than the others. Perhaps, yes, perhaps this one. He opened the box reverently. Blackthorn and phoenix feather, 10¼ inches. Unyielding. A warrior's wand, traditionally. As Harnack's fingers closed around the handle, warmth spread up his arm. He raised the wand and brought it down in a sweeping motion. Golden and silver sparks erupted from the tip, illuminating the dusty shop like miniature fireworks. "Oh, bravo!" Ollivander exclaimed. "Curious, most curious." "What's curious?" Harnack asked, still feeling the wand's comfortable weight in his hand, as if it had always belonged there. "I remember every wand I've ever made, Mr. Potter. The phoenix who gave the feather for your wand gave just 2 others. One resides in the wand that gave you that scar." Ollivander's pale eyes seemed to look through Harnack rather than at him. "And the other?" "Well, the other was crafted into a holly wand that I thought might choose you today. But it seems your path has diverged from what might have been expected." "Blackthorn," Gornick said thoughtfully. "A wood associated with warfare and protection in many traditions." "Indeed." Ollivander nodded. Blackthorn wands require a period of hardship and danger to truly bond with their owners. They're particularly suited to warrior magic. His gaze lingered on Harnack's goblin-style attire. "It seems your upbringing has indeed influenced the wand's choice, young man." Harnack studied the wand in his hand, deep black wood polished to a subtle sheen, with intricate spirals carved around the handle that felt like they'd been made for his grip specifically. It was beautiful in an austere way, much like goblin craftsmanship. "It feels right," he said simply. "Then it is right," Ollivander confirmed. "The wand has chosen. That will be 7 galleons." As they exited the shop, wand carefully stored in an inside pocket of his robes, Harnack noticed the crowd outside had grown. Word had clearly spread of Harry Potter's appearance in Diagon Alley. People lined the street, straining for a glimpse of him. Some looked merely curious, others openly hostile, a few seemed almost worshipful. "Steady," Gornick murmured. "We'll complete our purchases efficiently." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. At Flourish and Blots, Harnack selected his required textbooks plus several supplementary volumes that caught his interest, particularly in defense against the dark arts and transfiguration. In the apothecary, his goblin-trained eye for quality ingredients impressed the proprietor, who muttered about, finally, a first-year who knows fresh from dried. At Madame Malkin's, the seamstress fussed nervously under the watchful eyes of the goblin guards but managed to fit Harnack for his school robes without incident, though she clearly found his request for more practical mobility in the sleeves and shoulders unusual. Throughout, Harnack maintained his composed exterior while keenly observing the reactions around him. Most adult wizards seemed uncertain how to interact with him, torn between the celebrity status of Harry Potter and discomfort with his goblin entourage. Children were more direct, staring openly or pointing. One incident stood out. As they exited the bookshop, a red-haired woman with a large brood of children, most notably a pair of identical twins and a boy around Harnack's age, approached hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Gornick with commendable directness. "I'm Molly Weasley. My son Ron will be starting Hogwarts this year as well. I just wanted to say hello and—" She faltered slightly. "And that we're glad to see Harry looking so well." Before Gornick could respond, one of the twins piped up. "Is it true you live underground with the goblins? Fred and I tried to sneak past the guards at Gringotts once to see the lower levels, but we only made it to the second security checkpoint before they caught us." "George!" Mrs. Weasley exclaimed, horrified. Harnack found himself smiling despite his carefully maintained composure. "The security gets much more interesting after the second checkpoint," he replied. "And yes, I live in Gringotts, though not all parts are underground." The twins looked delighted at this response, while their mother seemed torn between embarrassment and relief that Harnack had answered kindly. "We hope you'll be in Gryffindor with us," said the twin who must be Fred. Though I suppose you might end up in Ravenclaw if the goblins have been stuffing your head with books. Fred. George. That's quite enough, Mrs. Weasley said firmly. I apologize, she added to Gornick. They mean well but lack any sense of propriety. Gornick surprised her with what passed for a smile in goblin expressions. Directness is valued among our kind, Mrs. Weasley. No offense is taken. The younger boy, Ron, who had been staring open-mouthed at Harnack throughout this exchange, finally blurted out. Do you remember it? When you know who tried to kill you? Ronald Weasley, his mother gasped. Harnack considered the question seriously rather than taking offense. No clear memories, he answered honestly. Just a flash of green light. The boy nodded, seeming satisfied with this answer. Well, see you on the train then? Yes, Harnack said, finding he meant it. The Weasleys' straightforward approach was refreshing after the stares and whispers. See you on the train. As they continued their shopping, Ragnarok commented quietly. The Weasleys. An ancient bloodline, though fallen on harder times financially. They've traditionally been allies to progressive causes, including some goblin rights initiatives. Harnack filed this information away alongside his positive impression of the family. Potential allies would be valuable at Hogwarts. Their final stop was Elopsal Emporium, where Gornick surprised Harnack with a gift, a magnificent snowy owl who fixed him with intelligent amber eyes. For communication, Gornick explained. And companionship. Hogwarts can be isolating for those who stand apart. Harnack stroked the owl's feathers gently, feeling an immediate connection. Thank you, Father. She's beautiful. What will you name her? Ragnarok asked. Harnack considered. Hedwig, he decided. From History of Magic, the patron saint of orphans. A fitting choice that acknowledged both his past losses and present blessings. The owl seemed to approve, nipping his finger affectionately. With their purchases complete, the goblin party made its way back toward the leaky cauldron, the crowds parting before them like water around stones. Just before they reached the exit, however, a final confrontation awaited. A tall, aristocratic wizard with white blonde hair, unmistakably Lucius Malfoy, stood blocking their path, accompanied by a boy Harnack's age who could only be his son, given the striking resemblance. Director Ragnarok, Malfoy said smoothly, offering the minimal bow protocol required. How generous of Gringotts to personally escort its ward for his school's shopping. Lord Malfoy, Ragnarok acknowledged with equal formality. Harnack is a prince of the nation. His security and comfort are naturally priorities. Malfoy's eyes shifted to Harnack, assessing him with cold calculation. Mr. Potter, you've caused quite a stir today. I trust you've found everything you need for Hogwarts? I have, Lord Malfoy. Harnack replied with the precise degree of formal respect goblin custom dictated for potential adversaries. Thank you for your concern. My son, Draco. Malfoy continued, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. He'll be in your year at Hogwarts. Draco Malfoy studied Harnack with undisguised curiosity tinged with the superiority his father had clearly cultivated in him. Potter. Father says you've been raised by goblins. Does that mean you speak their language? The question was asked with a hint of challenge, as if testing whether Harry Potter had truly gone native among the goblins. Harnack switched seamlessly to gobbledygook, the harsh syllables flowing naturally. I speak it as well as you, young Malfoy. Perhaps better than your father speaks the language of genuine diplomacy. The goblin's expressions remained neutral, but a gleam of appreciation appeared in Ragnarok's eyes. What did he say? Draco demanded, looking to his father. I believe, Lucius Malfoy replied coldly, that Mr. Potter was demonstrating his linguistic abilities. How educational your upbringing must have been. The nation values comprehensive education, Lord Malfoy. Harnack replied, switching back to English. Languages, finance, history, magic, and an understanding of honor and consequences. I've been fortunate in my teachers. The implied contrast with Malfoy's own values wasn't lost on the aristocrat, whose eyes narrowed slightly. Indeed. Well, I'm sure Hogwarts will provide yet another perspective on your education. Malfoy's lips curved in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I look forward to seeing how you adjust to life among your own kind. I look forward to bringing the values of both my heritages to Hogwarts. Harnack countered smoothly. Good day, Lord Malfoy. Draco, I expect we'll see more of each other at school. Without waiting for a response, Ragnarok led their party around the Malfoys and through the exit, leaving father and son staring after them with mixed expressions of surprise and calculation. Once back in the secure transport that would return them to Gringotts, Harnack let out a long breath, some of his careful composure falling away. You handled that well, Gornick said approvingly. Both the Weasleys and the Malfoys represent important factions you'll encounter at Hogwarts. The Malfoys were testing you, Ragnarok added. Assessing whether you're truly integrated into Goblin society, or merely our puppet. Your response gave them something to think about. Harnack nodded, processing the day's experiences. Everyone was watching me. Judging. It was like being a rare creature in a magical menagerie. You are rare, Gornick said simply. The boy who lived, raised by goblins, heir to both traditions. There has never been anyone quite like you in wizard or goblin history. Which means, Ragnarok continued, that you have the opportunity to define what that means. To show them something they've never seen before. Harnack looked down at his hands, human hands that had learned goblin crafts, that could channel both human and goblin magic, that belonged simultaneously to both worlds and neither. I'll make both my families proud, he said quietly. Gornick clasped his son's shoulder with fierce affection. You already do. The remaining weeks before September 1st passed in a flurry of final preparations. Harnack reviewed his textbooks, finding much of the first-year material already familiar from his prior studies but approaching it with fresh eyes, searching for connections between wizard theory and goblin practice. He spent hours with his new wand, not performing spells that remained forbidden until he reached Hogwarts, but familiarizing himself with its feel, its balance, the way his magic resonated with it when he focused his intent. Practical matters occupied much of his time as well. His trunk was packed with a mixture of standard Hogwarts supplies and goblin items, special quills designed for both English and gobbledygook script, a set of small tools for metalworking should he find time for that hobby, carefully selected books from the goblin archives that he had permission to bring into the wizard world. The most significant preparation, however, was mental and emotional. Gornick arranged a series of intensive briefings with goblins who had experience in the wizard world, ensuring Harnack understood exactly what awaited him. They will attempt to categorize you immediately, explained Sharpclaw, a goblin who had served as liaison with the ministry for decades. Wizard society, especially among the young, revolves around clear affiliations, houses, bloodlines, political alignments. Your dual nature will confuse and possibly threaten them. How should I respond? Harnack asked, taking notes in his precise, goblin-influenced handwriting. Neither reject nor overemphasize either aspect of your identity. Sharpclaw advised. Be yourself, the self we have helped you become. Those worth knowing will accept the complexity. Those who cannot. He shrugged. Their limitations are not your concern. The night before his departure, Harnack participated in a goblin ritual rarely witnessed by outsiders, the blessing of the warrior departing. In a chamber deep within Gringotts, surrounded by the nation's elders and leadership, he knelt as ancient words were spoken over him, invoking protection, wisdom, and strength. Director Ragnarok himself performed the central blessing, placing a silver circlet momentarily on Harnack's brow, not to keep, but to symbolize his status and the nation's continued recognition of it despite his physical departure. Though you walk among wizards, you carry the nation with you. Ragnarok intoned in formal gobbledygook. Its honor is your honor. Its strength is your strength. Its wisdom guides your path. Later, in their private quarters, Gornick presented Harnack with two gifts. The first was practical, a specially crafted communication mirror. For emergencies or important matters, he explained. More secure than outposts for sensitive information. The second gift was deeply personal, a silver pendant bearing the combined symbols of the Potter family and Gornik's clan, magically engraved with protective runes. "To remember who you are," Gornik said simply, fastening it around his son's neck. "All of who you are." Harnack touched the pendant, feeling the magic humming within it, goblin craftsmanship infused with both goblin and wizard protective spells. "I won't forget," he promised. They sat together late into the night, not speaking much, each aware that tomorrow would begin a new chapter, the first significant separation in their 9 years together. Finally, as the enchanted crystals dimmed to simulate night, Gornik rose. "Sleep well, my son," he said. "Tomorrow you begin walking a path no other has walked before." "Thank you, father," Harnack replied, the goblin word for father feeling right on his tongue despite its harsh syllables. "For everything. For my life." Gornik nodded once, his expression containing all the fierce pride and love that goblins rarely spoke aloud but demonstrated in every action. Then he left, allowing Harnack one last night of privacy before the very public journey that awaited. Alone in his room, Harnack looked around at the space that had been his sanctuary for 9 years. The weapons rack where his training blades hung. The desk where he'd studied both goblin and wizard knowledge. The enchanted window that showed the surface world above, currently displaying a night sky filled with stars. Tomorrow, he would board the Hogwarts Express as Harry Potter, the boy who lived, returning to wizard society after years of mysterious absence. But he would carry Harnack's son of Gornik within him, the Goblin Prince, the child of 2 worlds, determined to honor both his heritages while forging his own unique path. With that thought, he extinguished the light and closed his eyes, ready for whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. Chapter 3. Hogwarts and Heritage King's Cross Station bustled with the usual Monday morning crowd, business people rushing to work, tourists consulting maps, families saying goodbyes. None of them noticed anything unusual about Platform 9, nor the steady trickle of oddly dressed people who seemed to vanish between Platforms 9 and 10. Harnack observed it all from beneath a hooded cloak, standing beside Gornik in a shadowed corner. His trunk, a masterpiece of goblin craftsmanship with multiple hidden compartments and protective enchantments, sat at his feet. Hedwig dozed in her cage, undisturbed by the station's noise. "Remember," Gornik said quietly, "reveal yourself only when safely on the platform. The director's intelligence suggests journalists may be watching." Harnack nodded. After his appearance in Diagon Alley, the wizarding press had been in a frenzy, publishing wild speculations about the Goblin Prince and the boy who lived's return. The last thing he needed was a confrontation before even boarding the train. 10 minutes until the barrier opens for the day. Gornik consulted a pocket watch of intricate design. "Are you prepared?" The question went beyond the physical preparations, and both knew it. Harnack met his father's eyes steadily. "I am." Simple words, but they carried the weight of 9 years of training, of dual identities carefully cultivated, of strategies discussed and contingencies planned. Gornik nodded once, satisfied. "Then it is time." They moved with practiced coordination, timing their approach to coincide with a group of obviously magical families heading toward the barrier. Harnack pushed his trolley casually, hood still concealing his features, while Gornik walked beside him in a glamoured appearance that made him look like a slightly short human man rather than a goblin. The barrier between platforms tingled with magic as they passed through, emerging onto Platform 9 3/4 where the Hogwarts Express waited in all its scarlet glory, steam billowing around it. The platform was already crowded with students and parents, trunks and cages, tearful goodbyes and excited reunions. "Find a compartment quickly," Gornik advised, helping transfer Harnack's trunk to the train. "Establish your space before the platform fills completely." Harnack nodded, securing an empty compartment near the middle of the train, not so far back that he'd appear to be hiding, not so far forward that he'd be immediately visible to everyone boarding. Gornik helped him stow his trunk, then stepped back, their eyes meeting in silent communication. 9 years ago, a dying child had been rescued from a cupboard. Today, a young prince prepared to enter a world that both belonged to him by birth and remained foreign to his experience. So much had changed. So much remained uncertain. "Honor and strength, my son," Gornik said formally in gobbledygook, touching his fist to his heart in the traditional goblin farewell. "Wisdom and prosperity, my father," Harnack replied in the same language, returning the gesture. With one last nod, Gornik departed, moving swiftly through the increasing crowd. Only when he had disappeared through the barrier did Harnack finally lower his hood, revealing his distinctive features to the wizarding world once more. The reaction was almost immediate. A girl passing by his compartment glanced in, did a double take, then hissed something to her friends. Within minutes, a steady stream of students was finding excuses to walk past, peering in with varying degrees of subtlety. Harnack remained composed, sitting straight-backed in the goblin meditation posture, his expression neutral but not unfriendly. Let them look. Let them wonder. First impressions mattered, and he would not be seen fidgeting or uncomfortable. The compartment door slid open, revealing the red-haired boy he'd met in Diagon Alley, Ron Weasley. Hi," Brown said awkwardly. "Mind if I join you? Everywhere else is filling up." Harnack gestured to the seat opposite him. "Please." Ron settled in, placing his own battered trunk in the rack above with some effort. An ancient rat poked its nose out of his pocket, whiskers twitching. "So," Ron began, clearly searching for an opening line. "You really were raised by goblins then?" Direct. Harnack appreciated that. "Yes. Healer Gornik found me when I was 2 and adopted me into the nation." "Wicked," Ron breathed, fascination overcoming his initial awkwardness. "What's it like? Living in Gringotts?" "Different from a wizard home, I imagine," Harnack replied with a slight smile. "More stone, for one thing. Better security. Excellent food, though not what you'd find at wizard tables." "Better security? Like dragons and stuff?" Ron leaned forward eagerly. "I couldn't possibly comment on Gringotts' security features," Harnack replied in a perfect imitation of the formal tone bank goblins used with customers, then broke into a genuine grin at Ron's crestfallen expression. "But yes, there are some dragons. At the deeper levels." Their conversation was interrupted as the compartment door slid open again. This time it was a bushy-haired girl with rather large front teeth, already dressed in her Hogwarts robes. "Has anyone seen a toad?" "A boy named Neville's lost one," she announced, then did a double take as she noticed Harnack. "You're Harry Potter. I've read all about you in Modern Magical History and the Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts. Those books contain significant inaccuracies," Harnack replied calmly. "And I prefer Harnack among friends, though professors will likely use Potter." The girl blinked, momentarily thrown off her rehearsed script. "Oh. I'm Hermione Granger." She thrust out her hand formally. "Pleasure to meet you." Harnack clasped her forearm in the goblin style before remembering and adjusting to a human handshake. "Likewise." Hermione's eyes widened at the unfamiliar greeting. "That's a goblin handshake. I've read about them but never seen one. Is it true you were raised in Gringotts? The Daily Prophet had an article about you being some sort of goblin prince, but I wasn't sure how much to believe given their reputation for sensationalism." The rapid-fire questions might have overwhelmed some, but Harnack was accustomed to goblin directness. "Yes, I was raised by Healer Gornik in Gringotts after he rescued me from abusive relatives. And yes, I hold the title of prince within the nation, though it doesn't translate perfectly to wizard understanding of royalty." "Fascinating." Hermione sat down uninvited, clearly forgetting about the lost toad. "So you speak gobbledygook? And understand goblin magic?" "I've read it's fundamentally different from wizard magic in its approach to breathe, Hermione," Ron interjected with a roll of his eyes. "Give the bloke a chance to answer one question before asking 10 more." Hermione flushed slightly but looked expectantly at Harnack. "I do speak gobbledygook," he confirmed. "As for goblin magic, there are aspects I'm permitted to discuss and aspects I'm not. The nation guards its secrets carefully." "Of course." Hermione nodded seriously. "Wizard-goblin relations have been fraught with distrust historically. The rebellions of the 1600s and 1700s were particularly The compartment doors slid open yet again, revealing Draco Malfoy flanked by two large boys who resembled junior trolls more than first years. "They're saying Harry Potter's in this compartment," Malfoy announced, his gaze landing on Harnack with recognition from their Diagon Alley encounter. "So it's true. Harnack's son of Gornick," he corrected smoothly, inclining his head slightly. "We met briefly in Diagon Alley, Herr Malfoy." Draco looked momentarily taken aback by the formal acknowledgement of his status as heir to House Malfoy. "Yes, well, these are Crabbe and Goyle." He gestured vaguely to his companions before his gaze shifted to Ron. "No need to ask who you are. Red hair, hand-me-down robes. You must be a Weasley." Ron's face flushed nearly as red as his hair. "And you," Draco continued, eyeing Hermione with disdain. "I don't recognize your family name." "That's because I'm Muggleborn," Hermione replied, lifting her chin defiantly. "Ah," Draco's lip curled. "I see you're already collecting interesting specimens, Potter. A blood trader and a mud careful, Herr Malfoy." Harnack interrupted, his voice pleasant but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "The nation judges individuals by their actions and abilities, not their ancestry. I've adopted many such values." The compartment temperature seemed to drop several degrees as Harnack and Draco locked eyes, a silent battle of wills that the young Malfoy clearly hadn't expected. Finally, Draco inclined his head slightly. "Well, you'll soon find that some wizarding families are better than others, Potter, Harnack. You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort. I can help you there." He extended his hand. Harnack considered the offered handshake thoughtfully. "I value the opportunity to form my own judgments, Herr Malfoy. Perhaps we can continue this conversation another time, when we both had a chance to settle into Hogwarts." It was neither acceptance nor rejection, a diplomatic response that acknowledged Malfoy's status while maintaining distance. Draco withdrew his hand, expression calculating. "As you wish. Though you'll find that some doors close if you walk through the wrong ones first." With that parting shot, he departed, Crabbe and Goyle lumbering after him. "Bloody hell," Ron breathed once they'd gone. "You handled that differently than I expected." "What did you expect?" Harnack asked, genuinely curious. "I dunno. More confrontation? Malfoys and Weasleys have never gotten along. His dad's a real piece of work. Goblin diplomacy teaches that open hostility should be reserved for open enemies." Harnack explained. "Malfoy may become an enemy, but creating one unnecessarily would be poor strategy." Hermione stared at him with undisguised fascination. "That's a remarkably mature perspective." Harnack shrugged slightly. "The nation doesn't coddle its children. We learn consequences early." "We?" Ron caught the pronoun. "You really do think of yourself as one of them, don't you?" "I am one of them," Harnack replied simply. "By blood adoption, by raising, by choice. I'm also a wizard." "Both are true." The train journey continued with less dramatic interruptions, though a steady stream of curious students found excuses to pass by their compartment. Ron shared his sandwiches, which Harnack politely declined, offering goblin-made pastries from his own supplies instead, while Hermione peppered him with questions about everything from goblin educational methods to his expectations for Hogwarts. "What house do you think you'll be in?" she asked eventually. "I've been reading about them, and I hope for Gryffindor, though Ravenclaw wouldn't be bad. All have their merits," Harnack replied diplomatically. He and Gornick had discussed this at length. "Slytherin values ambition and cunning, traits the nation respects. Ravenclaw prizes knowledge, which I've been taught to value. Hufflepuff honors loyalty and hard work, both essential goblin virtues. And Gryffindor," he glanced at Ron, who was clearly hoping for this outcome, "celebrates courage, which every culture admires." "You're not worried about Slytherin?" Ron looked surprised. "That's where Voldemort came from," Harnack supplied, causing both Ron and Hermione to flinch at the name. "One wizard doesn't define a house, just as one goblin doesn't define a clan." As the train neared Hogsmeade, Harnack changed into his school robes, though he kept his hair in its goblin-style binding and wore the silver pendant Gornick had given him outside his uniform. First impressions would be crucial, and he wanted both his heritages visible. The platform at Hogsmeade Station was chaos, older students streaming one direction, a booming voice calling, "First years! First years over here!" Harnack followed the voice to find an enormous bearded man holding a lantern aloft. "Come on, follow me, any more first years? Mind your step, now!" the giant called, leading them down a steep, narrow path. "You'll get your first sight o' Hogwarts in a sec, just round this bend here." The narrow path opened suddenly onto the edge of a great black lake. Perched atop a high mountain on the other side, its windows sparkling in the starry sky, was a vast castle with many turrets and towers. Even Harnack, raised amid the impressive architecture of Gringotts' deeper levels, found himself momentarily breathless at the sight. The castle radiated ancient magic, a presence he could feel even from this distance. "No more and 4 to a boat!" the man called, pointing to a fleet of small boats sitting in the water by the shore. Harnack found himself sharing with Ron, Hermione, and a round-faced boy who must be the Neville who'd lost his toad. As they glided across the lake, Harnack trailed his fingers through the water, sensing the magic that permeated it. Goblin's sensitivity to magical residues was one ability the blood adoption had partially transferred to him. He could feel the lake's ancient power, the protective enchantments layered over centuries, the sense of watchful sentience. The boats carried them through a curtain of ivy concealing an opening in the cliff face, along a dark tunnel that seemed to take them right underneath the castle, until they reached an underground harbor where they clambered out onto rocks and pebbles. "Oi, you there!" the giant called suddenly, checking the boats. "Is this your toad?" "Trevor!" Neville cried blissfully, holding out his hands. They walked up a passageway in the rock, emerging finally onto smooth, damp grass right in the shadow of the castle. Up a flight of stone steps they went, crowding around the huge oak front door. "Everyone here?" The giant raised a gigantic fist and knocked 3 times on the castle door. The door swung open to reveal a tall, black-haired witch in emerald-green robes with a very stern face, Professor McGonagall, whom Harnack recognized from their meeting in Gringotts years earlier. Her eyes swept over the assembled first years, pausing fractionally on Harnack before continuing. "The first years, Professor McGonagall," the giant announced. "Thank you, Hagrid. I will take them from here." She led them through the entrance hall, an enormous space with flaming torches, a magnificent marble staircase, and ceiling so high it was difficult to make out. Harnack observed everything with keen attention, noting defensive positions, exit routes, and the flow of magic through the ancient stones, all automatic assessments from his goblin training. Professor McGonagall showed them into a small empty chamber off the hall, where they crowded in, standing rather closer together than they would usually have done, peering about nervously. "Welcome to Hogwarts," she began, launching into an explanation of the 4 houses and the sorting ceremony to come. Harnack listened politely, though he already knew this information. Instead, he focused on his fellow first years, noting their reactions and demeanor. Some, like Malfoy, projected confident superiority. Others, like Neville, practically vibrated with anxiety. Most fell somewhere between, a mixture of excitement and nervousness that manifested in fidgeting and whispers. When several ghosts streamed through the wall, causing many students to jump or yelp, Harnack remained still, watching with interest. Gringotts had its own spirits, though of a different nature than these cheerful apparitions, so the concept wasn't new to him. Finally, McGonagall returned. "Form a line and follow me," she instructed. The sorting was about to begin. The great hall was magnificent, thousands of candles floating in midair, for long tables where older students sat watching the newcomers, golden plates and goblets gleaming in the candlelight, and above it all, a velvety black ceiling dotted with stars. "It's bewitched to look like the sky outside," Hermione whispered. "I read about it in Hogwarts, a history." Harnack nodded, though his attention had shifted to the high table, where the teachers sat. Central in a large golden chair was Albus Dumbledore, immediately recognizable with his long silver beard and half-moon spectacles. Their eyes met briefly across the hall, and Dumbledore gave a slight nod which Harnack returned with equal subtlety. Professor McGonagall placed a four-legged stool in front of the first years, and atop it, a pointed wizard's hat, extremely old and patched. To the surprise of many first years, though not Harnack, who'd read about the tradition, the hat twitched, a rip near its brim opening wide like a mouth, and it began to sing. The song explained the qualities of each house, much as Harnack had summarized on the train. When it finished, the hall burst into applause, and Professor McGonagall stepped forward holding a long roll of parchment. "When I call your name, you will put on the hat and sit on the stool to be sorted," she announced. "Abbott, Hannah." As the sorting progressed alphabetically, Harnack observed each student's placement, noting patterns. Malfoy went to Slytherin almost instantly, as expected. Hermione, after nearly a minute under the hat, went to Gryffindor, causing Ron to groan beside him. The hall grew quieter as they approached the PS, anticipation building. When McGonagall called, "Potter, Harry!" whispers suddenly broke out like little hissing fires all over the hall. "Potter, did she say? The Harry Potter? The one raised by goblins?" Harnack stepped forward with the balanced grace his goblin training had instilled, back straight, movements precise. His appearance, the goblin-styled hair, the hint of silver pendant visible at his neck, the composed demeanor so unlike an ordinary 11-year-old, caused a fresh wave of murmurs. As he sat on the stool, the last thing he saw before the hat dropped over his eyes was the hall full of people craning to get a good look at him. Then he was looking at the black inside of the hat, waiting. Said a small voice in his ear. "Difficult. Very difficult. Not the mind I expected to find in Harry Potter's head, that's certain. There's courage, oh yes, and a fine mind. Talent, by the cauldron full. And interesting, a dual nature I've not encountered before. Part wizard, part goblin in how you see the world." "I am both," Harnack thought firmly. "Indeed you are," the hat agreed. "But where to put you? You have ambition worthy of Slytherin, intellect that would shine in Ravenclaw, loyalty deep as any Hufflepuff, and bravery that Gryffindor himself would admire. Your parents were in Gryffindor, did you know?" "I did," Harnack thought. "But I must follow my own path." "Wise beyond your years," the hat commented. "The goblins raise you well. You could reshape the world from any house, but where will you thrive? Where will you find the tools you need for the destiny that awaits?" Harnack considered. "Place me where I can best bridge worlds." The hat chuckled. "Ah, now that is the question, isn't it? Very well. I know just where you'll find what you seek. Better be Ravenclaw." The hat shouted the last word to the entire hall, which had grown increasingly quiet during the unusually long sorting. There was a moment of stunned silence. Many had expected the boy who lived to follow his parents into Gryffindor, before the Ravenclaw table erupted in cheers and applause. Harnack removed the hat calmly, placing it back on the stool with a respectful nod that made it twitch appreciatively, then walked with measured steps to the Ravenclaw table. He chose a seat that offered good sidelines to the rest of the hall, inclining his head to his new housemates with formal goblin courtesy. "Welcome to Ravenclaw," an older girl with a prefect badge said, extending her hand. "I'm Penelope Clearwater, Harnack's son of Gornick," he replied, shaking her hand in the human fashion this time. "Though professors will likely use Potter." A dark-haired girl across the table leaned forward eagerly. "Is it true you were raised by goblins? Do you really live in Gringotts?" Before Harnack could respond, Penelope intervened. "Let's let him settle in before the interrogation begins, shall we? The sorting's still going on." Indeed, McGonagall had continued calling names, though many students were still casting curious glances toward the Ravenclaw table. When Weasley Ronald was called, Harnack watched with interest as the hat deliberated briefly before declaring, "Gryffindor." Ron looked simultaneously relieved and disappointed as he joined his brothers at the Gryffindor table, casting a glance toward Harnack that suggested he'd hoped they'd be in the same house. Once Zabini Blaze became a Slytherin, Dumbledore rose to his feet, beaming at the students with arms opened wide. "Welcome," he said. Welcome to a new year at Hogwarts. Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words, nitwit. Blubber. Oddment. Tweak. Thank you. As food appeared magically on the golden plates, Harnack's housemates turned their attention back to him. So, began a boy who'd introduced himself as Michael Corner. What's it like? Living with goblins? Harnack served himself a modest portion of food. Goblin dining etiquette emphasized taking only what one needed, before responding. Different from wizard life in many ways, similar in others. We value knowledge, discipline, and honor above all. Our magic approaches problems differently. Our customs emphasize actions over words. Is that why you speak so formally? Asked a pretty Asian girl named Cho Chang, who was sitting nearby despite being a year older. Goblin language doesn't have the casual registers that English does. Harnack explained. We speak directly, say what we mean. Excessive verbal decoration is seen as potential deception. This launched a discussion of linguistic differences that perfectly suited the Ravenclaw table, with several students offering observations about how language shaped thought. Harnack participated thoughtfully, relieved that his housemates' curiosity manifested in intellectual discussion rather than gawking. Do you really have a title? Asked a tiny first-year named Lisa Turpin. The prophet called you a prince. It doesn't translate perfectly to wizard understanding. Harnack replied carefully. I'm considered a son of the nation with certain ceremonial responsibilities and rights. Prince is an approximation. Does that mean you'll inherit leadership someday? Terry Boot asked. No. Director Ragnar's position passes through goblin bloodlines only. My status is honorary but respected. Throughout dinner, Harnack noticed the staff watching him with varying expressions. Dumbledore's gaze returned to him periodically, thoughtful but not unfriendly. McGonagall observed him with what seemed like cautious assessment. A hook-nosed professor in black, Snape, he recalled from their meeting at Gringotts, studied him with an intensity that bordered on hostility. And a nervous-looking man in a purple turban kept glancing his way, then quickly looking elsewhere. When that professor's eyes met his briefly, Harnack felt a strange sensation, a sharp pain in his lightning scar that made him wince slightly. Are you all right? Asked Penelope, noticing his reaction. Fine, Harnack replied smoothly, filing away the incident for later consideration. Who is the professor in the purple turban? Oh, that's Professor Quirrell. He teaches defense against the dark arts. Brilliant mind, apparently, but terribly nervous. They say he encountered vampires during his travels and was never quite the same after. As dinner transitioned to dessert, conversation turned to classes and what they might expect in the coming year. Harnack participated enough to be sociable while continuing his quiet observation of both students and staff. This was reconnaissance, in goblin terms, learning the terrain before planning strategy. After dessert, Dumbledore rose again to give start-of-term notices, including a warning about the third-floor corridor being off-limits to anyone who didn't wish to die a very painful death. This piqued Harnack's interest immediately. Such a direct statement of lethal consequences in a school was unusual and suggested serious protective measures around something valuable. Filing this information away, he joined his fellow Ravenclaws in singing the school song, a chaotic experience that would have horrified goblin music masters, then followed Penelope and the other prefects toward Ravenclaw Tower. Unlike other houses with password-protected entrances, Ravenclaw Tower featured a door with a bronze eagle-shaped knocker. When Penelope approached, the eagle animated and spoke. I have cities, but no houses. I have mountains, but no trees. I have water, but no fish. What am I? A map, Penelope answered promptly. The door swung open. You'll need to solve a riddle each time you enter, she explained to the first years. If you can't solve it, you'll need to wait for someone who can. It encourages learning. The Ravenclaw common room was a wide, circular room with arched windows set into the walls, offering spectacular views of the surrounding mountains. The ceiling was domed and painted with stars, which were echoed in the midnight blue carpet. Tables, chairs, and bookcases lined the walls, and a white marble statue of a regal-looking woman stood beside a door that presumably led to the dormitories. Rowena Ravenclaw, Penelope explained, gesturing to the statue. Our house founder. As the prefects explained house rules and customs, Harnack noted how different this environment was from the practical, utilitarian spaces of Gringotts. Here, beauty and intellectual stimulation were prioritized over defensibility or efficiency. It wasn't better or worse, just different, another aspect of the wizard world he would need to integrate into his understanding. The boys' dormitory contained 5 four-poster beds hung with blue and bronze curtains. Harnack's trunk had already been delivered beside one of the beds, with Hedwig's cage atop it. The snowy owl hooted softly in greeting as he approached. Magnificent owl, commented Terry Boot, who would be one of his dorm mates along with Michael Corner, Anthony Goldstein, and Kevin Entwistle. Thank you, Harnack replied, opening the cage to let Hedwig stretch her wings. She was a gift from my father before leaving for Hogwarts. Your goblin father? Anthony asked, then flushed. Sorry, that sounded rude. I meant, yes, Healer Gornick, Harnack confirmed, taking no offense. He thought I might appreciate a companion who could travel between Hogwarts and Gringotts freely. As his dorm mates prepared for bed, chattering excitedly about the feast and their expectations for classes, Harnack maintained his observation. Boot and Corner seemed friendly if a bit reserved, watching him with undisguised curiosity. Goldstein was more direct, asking thoughtful questions about goblin culture. Entwistle, muggle-born and overwhelmed by the wizarding world in general, treated Harnack's unusual background as just one more extraordinary thing in a day full of them. Once the others were asleep, Harnack sat cross-legged on his bed in the goblin meditation posture, reflecting on the day's events. His integration into Hogwarts had begun more smoothly than he might have expected. Ravenclaw seemed an ideal placement. Intellectual curiosity had proven a more respectful form of interest than the celebrity worship he might have faced elsewhere. Yet challenges remained. The reactions from certain staff members, particularly Snape and Quirrell, suggested potential complications. The strange pain in his scar warranted investigation. And tomorrow would bring classes, where his unusual educational background would be tested against wizard teaching methods. Drawing the communication mirror from his trunk, he activated it with a touch of his finger. Gornick's face appeared almost immediately. You've arrived safely, his father observed. Not a question, Gringotts' intelligence would have confirmed this already, but an opening for Harnack's report. Switching to gobbledygook, Harnack provided a concise summary of the day's events, including his sorting into Ravenclaw, initial interactions with key students, and observations of staff. The pain in your scar is concerning. Gornick frowned when Harnack mentioned the incident with Quirrell. The containment rituals should prevent such manifestations. Monitor it closely and report any recurrence immediately. I will, Harnack promised. Ravenclaw is a strategic placement, Gornick continued, moving to more positive topics. Their values align well with the nation's. Build alliances there, but don't neglect connections with other houses. Each offers resources you may need. They spoke for a few more minutes, Gornick offering guidance on navigating first classes and Harnack asking questions about specific wizard customs he'd observed during the feast. Finally, with a formal goblin farewell, they ended the communication. Lying back on his bed, Harnack gazed up at the blue canopy overhead. His first day in the wizard world had brought challenges and opportunities in equal measure. Tomorrow would bring more of both. As he drifted toward sleep, he touched the silver pendant at his neck, a reminder of who he was and where he came from, even as he stepped further into the world where he'd been born. The whispers followed Harnack from the moment he left Ravenclaw Tower the next morning. There, look. Where? The one with the long black hair in the goblin style. Did you see his face? Did you see his scar? Students lined up outside classrooms stood on tiptoe to get a look at him, doubled back in corridors to pass him again, staring openly. Some even pointed, as if he were an exhibit rather than a fellow student. Harnack maintained his composed exterior, acknowledging the attention with slight nods when eye contact was made but otherwise proceeding as if it were perfectly normal to be the subject of such scrutiny. His first class was Charms with Professor Flitwick, head of Ravenclaw House. As Harnack entered the classroom with his housemates, he noticed the tiny professor perched atop a stack of books to see over his desk. Flitwick was part goblin, Harnack knew from his briefings, though most wizard-raised students probably didn't recognize the subtle signs in his features and mannerisms. During roll call, Flitwick gave an excited squeak when he reached Potter Harry, and toppled out of sight behind his desk. Harnack winced internally at the display but kept his expression neutral. Once class began properly, however, Flitwick proved to be an excellent teacher, explaining the theory behind simple charms with clarity and enthusiasm. When he set them to practicing wand movements without actual incantations, he moved around the classroom offering corrections and demonstrations. When he reached Harnack, Flitwick paused. "Your grip is unusual, Mr. Potter," he observed, noting how Harnack held his wand more like a goblin crafting tool than in the traditional wizard manner. "Goblin training emphasizes precision through the fingertips rather than the wrist, Professor," Harnack explained. "I'm trying to adapt it to wand work." "Fascinating approach." Flitwick's eyes gleamed with scholarly interest. "The standard grip offers advantages for certain spell work, but your method might provide better control for delicate charms. Perhaps we could discuss the differences after class sometime?" "I'd welcome that, Professor," Harnack replied, genuinely pleased at the opportunity to integrate his different magical educations. By the end of the lesson, Harnack had earned 5 points for Ravenclaw by correctly answering questions about charm theory and demonstrating a perfect practice motion for the levitation charm they would learn later in the term. Transfiguration with Professor McGonagall came next. She began the class with a stern warning about the seriousness of her subject, then demonstrated by changing her desk into a pig and back again. The impressive display was followed by complex notes, and then the assignment of turning matches into needles. Harnack approached the task methodically, drawing on both his goblin understanding of material properties and the wizard theory McGonagall had explained. Goblins didn't practice transfiguration as wizards did. They considered it somewhat disrespectful to the inherent nature of materials, but they did understand the principles of magical transformation. By lesson's end, he had produced a perfect silver needle, earning another 5 points for Ravenclaw and a rare smile from McGonagall. "Your technique is unorthodox, Mr. Potter," she observed, examining his work, "but effective. 5 points to Ravenclaw for excellent results." Hermione Granger, who had also successfully transformed her match, caught up with him as they left the classroom. "That was impressive," she said. "Your wand work looked different from what Professor McGonagall demonstrated, but it worked perfectly. Goblin magical theory approaches transformations differently," Harnack explained as they walked. They believe each material has an essential nature that should be respected rather than overridden. I tried to incorporate that perspective." "That's fascinating." Hermione's eyes lit up. "Could you explain more about how goblin magic differs from wizard approaches? Most books about goblin magic are frustratingly vague, probably due to the secrecy the nation maintains around their practices." Harnack considered how much he could share without violating goblin privacy. "Some aspects I'm not permitted to discuss, but I can explain the general philosophy. Perhaps during lunch?" Hermione beamed, clearly delighted at the prospect of new knowledge, and they continued to the great hall together, drawing curious looks from students who wondered why the Goblin Prince was conversing so animatedly with a Muggle-born Gryffindor. Lunch brought another kind of challenge as Harnack was approached by an older Ravenclaw prefect. "Potter, Professor Dumbledore has requested a meeting with you this evening after dinner," the prefect announced. "The password to his office is chocolate frogs." Harnack nodded, having expected this summons. "Thank you. I'll be there." That afternoon brought Defense Against the Dark Arts with Professor Quirrell, which proved disappointing. The classroom smelled strongly of garlic, allegedly to ward off a vampire Quirrell had encountered in Romania. The professor himself stuttered so badly that it was difficult to follow his lectures, and he seemed oddly reluctant to discuss how he'd fought off the zombie he claimed to have defeated. More concerning to Harnack was the return of the strange pain in his scar whenever Quirrell turned his back to the class, the turban facing toward them. The sensation wasn't overwhelming but definitely wasn't normal, and it corresponded exactly with those moments when the professor's face wasn't visible. Harnack filed this observation away to report to Gornick. The final class of the day was History of Magic, taught by a ghost named Professor Binns. While most students promptly fell asleep during his monotonous lecture on goblin rebellions, Harnack listened with critical attention, noting the many inaccuracies and wizard-centric perspective in Binns' account. The nation's records of these conflicts told a very different story. Professor, Harnack raised his hand during a particularly egregious mischaracterization of goblin motivations. The uprising of 1612 was primarily a response to the Wizard Council's Material Restriction Act, which prohibited goblins from purchasing certain metals and gems needed for their crafting. It wasn't simply greed as you suggested. The ghost blinked slowly, as if seeing Harnack for the first time. Eh? What's that? The textbook clearly states. The textbook was written by Vindictus Viridian, who served on the very council that passed those restrictions. Harnack pointed out politely but firmly. Goblin historical records document the economic impact of the act and the resulting food shortages in goblin communities that preceded the uprising. Professor Binns drifted into confused silence while the rest of the class stared at Harnack in varying degrees of shock and admiration. Eventually, the ghost muttered something about alternative interpretations and drifted back to his notes. That was brilliant, Terry Boot whispered as Binns resumed his drone. Where did you learn that? From the actual Goblin archives, Harnack replied quietly. The nation maintains detailed records of all interactions with wizards, especially conflicts. By dinner time, word of Harnack's correction of Binns had spread through Ravenclaw and beyond. It seemed to shift perceptions slightly, from viewing him as merely an oddity to recognizing that his goblin upbringing might offer valuable alternative perspectives. After eating, Harnack made his way to the headmaster's office, located behind a gargoyle statue on the second floor. Chocolate frogs, he said, and the gargoyle leapt aside, revealing a spiral staircase that moved upward like an escalator. At the top, he knocked on the polished oak door. Enter, called Dumbledore's voice from within. The headmaster's office was a large, circular room filled with curious silver instruments that whirred and emitted puffs of smoke. Portraits of previous headmasters and headmistresses dozed in their frames, while a magnificent red-gold bird the size of a swan perched on a stand near the desk. Good evening, Harry, or do you prefer Harnack? Dumbledore greeted, rising from behind his desk. Harnack, please, headmaster, he replied, taking the offered seat. Though I understand professors may find Potter more natural in the classroom context. Very well, Harnack. Dumbledore's blue eyes twinkled behind his half-moon spectacles. I trust your first day of classes has gone well? Professor McGonagall spoke highly of your transfiguration work. It's been informative, Harnack answered diplomatically. The teaching methods differ from what I'm accustomed to, but I'm adapting. I imagine they do, Dumbledore agreed, studying him with undisguised interest. Goblin education is renowned for its rigor and practical focus. I confess I'm quite curious about your experiences these past 9 years. What specifically would you like to know, Headmaster? Dumbledore steepled his long fingers. Perhaps we could start with your magical education. Goblins approach magic quite differently from wizards. How have you reconciled these different traditions? It was a shrewd opening question, one that probed both Harnack's magical abilities and his conceptual framework. The traditions are different but complementary, Harnack replied carefully. Goblin magic emphasizes understanding the inherent properties of materials and working in harmony with them. Wizard magic often imposes will directly. I've found value in both approaches. Fascinating. Dumbledore leaned forward slightly. And have you found it challenging to adapt to wand use after practicing wandless goblin techniques? The wand is a new tool that requires its own mastery, Harnack acknowledged. But understanding magical theory from multiple perspectives has advantages. I see connections others might miss. Dumbledore nodded thoughtfully. Your sorting into Ravenclaw suggests the Hat recognized that intellectual synthesis. Though I confess, many expected you might follow your parents into Gryffindor. The Hat considered all houses, Harnack said. It placed me where I could best develop my particular perspective. Indeed. Dumbledore's gaze became more penetrating. And what is that perspective, Harnack? How do you see your place in the wizarding world, given your unusual upbringing? This was the heart of the matter, Dumbledore trying to ascertain where his loyalties lay, how the goblin influence had shaped his worldview, whether he would be the savior the wizarding world expected or something else entirely. I stand between worlds, Headmaster, Harnack replied, meeting Dumbledore's eyes steadily. I honor my birth parents' sacrifice and my wizard heritage. I also honor the nation that saved and raised me. I see value in both cultures and deficiencies in both. Perhaps my purpose is to help bridge that divide. Something shifted in Dumbledore's expression, a flash of calculation followed by what seemed like genuine respect. A remarkably mature perspective for one so young. Your goblin father has raised you well. He has, Harnack agreed simply. May I ask, what do you know of the night your parents died? Of Voldemort? I know he murdered my parents. Attempted to murder me. Failed, apparently destroying himself in the process, though the nation believes his defeat was temporary. Dumbledore's eyebrows rose slightly. The Goblin Nation believes Voldemort will return? Yes. The dark magic in my scar suggests a connection that didn't fully sever with his apparent death. Harnack watched Dumbledore carefully as he said this, noting the lack of surprise in the headmaster's reaction. The nation performed containment rituals to isolate that magic and prevent it from influencing me. I see. Dumbledore was silent for a moment, clearly reassessing his approach. The goblins have shared more with you than I anticipated. Their understanding of certain magics is profound. They believed I deserved truth, appropriately delivered as I matured. Harnack said, the implicit criticism of Dumbledore's own secretive approach hanging in the air between them. Truth is a beautiful and terrible thing. Dumbledore murmured, almost to himself. But yes, perhaps you have earned it more than most. He refocused on Harnack. What else do you know of that night? I know there was a prophecy. That it somehow connected me to Voldemort. That he came to kill me because of it. Dumbledore actually started at this, genuine shock crossing his features before he controlled them. You know of the prophecy? Did the goblins? The nation has its own seers, Harnack replied. And its own intelligence sources. They believed I should understand why my parents died and why Voldemort targeted me specifically. A lengthy silence followed as Dumbledore seemed to recalibrate his entire approach. Finally, he sighed. It seems I have underestimated both you and your goblin guardians, Harnack. I had planned our conversations very differently, thinking I would need to gradually prepare you for certain truths. He smiled slightly. It appears those preparations have already been made. Not all truths, Harnack countered. I know of the prophecy's existence, but not its specific content. I know Voldemort may return, but not how or when. I know he gave me this scar, but not what magic it contains exactly. Fair points, Dumbledore acknowledged. Perhaps, then, we can establish a more equal exchange of information than I had initially envisioned. You share insights from your goblin education, and I share what I know of Voldemort and the prophecy. That seems reasonable, Harnack agreed, though inwardly cautious. Dumbledore was clearly adapting his strategy, shifting from treating him as a child to be guided to a more complex approach that acknowledged his goblin upbringing without fully trusting it. Excellent. Dumbledore rose, moving to stroke the magnificent bird on its perch. This is Fawkes, by the way. A phoenix. I believe the goblin word is Cosfarin? Close. Cosfarith. Harnack corrected, impressed despite himself at Dumbledore's knowledge of gobbledygook. The eternal flame-bearer. Indeed. Dumbledore smiled. Phoenixes are remarkable creatures, capable of carrying immensely heavy burdens. Their tears have healing powers, and when it is time for them to die, they burst into flames and are reborn from the ashes. The symbolism of the introduction wasn't lost on Harnack, Dumbledore subtly reminding him of his own rebirth from the ashes of his parents' deaths. Speaking of remarkable creatures, Dumbledore continued casually, I understand you've already made the acquaintance of Hagrid, our gamekeeper? Briefly, during the boat crossing, Harnack replied, noting the change of subject. We haven't spoken directly. Ah. He was very fond of your parents, you know. Particularly your father. I'm sure he'd be delighted if you paid him a visit in his hut on the grounds. Harnack recognized the suggestion for what it was, Dumbledore attempting to connect him with someone who had known his birth parents, perhaps hoping to strengthen his ties to his wizard heritage. I'll consider it, Headmaster. Dumbledore returned to his seat, expression becoming more serious. Now, there's one matter of some delicacy I wish to discuss. During the meeting at Gringotts this summer, it was mentioned that you would have access to your Potter vaults and inheritances through Goblin management. I wanted to ensure you understand that as Hogwarts headmaster, I remain available to provide guidance regarding those assets, should you wish it. And there it was, the attempt to maintain some influence over the Potter fortune and the political power it represented. Thank you, headmaster. Harnack replied politely but firmly. The nation has provided comprehensive education in financial management as part of my training. Father believes practical experience managing my inheritances will be valuable for my development. Of course. Dumbledore nodded, his expression revealing nothing. The offer remains open, nonetheless. Their conversation continued for another half hour, touching on Harnack's impressions of Hogwarts, his interactions with fellow students, and his academic interests. Throughout, Harnack maintained his balanced approach, respectful but not deferential, open but not revealing, acknowledging Dumbledore's authority as headmaster while subtly establishing boundaries around his personal autonomy. As their meeting concluded, Dumbledore escorted him to the door. I've enjoyed our conversation, Harnack. Perhaps we might make these meetings a regular occurrence? There is much we could learn from each other. I'd welcome the opportunity, Headmaster. Harnack agreed, seeing both potential value and potential risk in such an arrangement. Though my class schedule and study commitments will naturally take priority. Naturally. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. Ravenclaw to the core already, I see. Good evening, Harnack. Good evening, Headmaster. As Harnack descended the spiral staircase, he reflected on the meeting. Dumbledore was every bit as shrewd as Gornick and Ragnarok had warned, probing for information while revealing little, attempting to establish influence while appearing merely helpful, testing boundaries while maintaining a grandfatherly facade. Yet there had been moments of genuine respect as well, points where Dumbledore seemed to truly see him rather than the tool or symbol he might have expected. It would be a complex relationship to navigate, but potentially valuable for his long-term goals. Later that night, after reporting the meeting's details to Gornick via the communication mirror, Harnack lay awake contemplating his position. One day into his Hogwarts education, and already the currents of politics and history were swirling around him. His unique status, Goblin-raised savior of the wizarding world, made him a nexus of competing interests and agendas. But that position also offered unprecedented opportunities. No one before had ever stood so firmly in both worlds, understanding both perspectives from the inside. No one before had been in a position to truly bridge the ancient divide between Goblin and Wizard. It was a heavy responsibility for an 11-year-old, even one raised with Goblin expectations of maturity. Yet as Gornick had taught him when he first began weapons training, the heaviest blade becomes light with proper balance. Finding that balance would be his greatest challenge at Hogwarts. The first weeks at Hogwarts established patterns that would define Harnack's school experience. Academically, he excelled, bringing his unique goblin-wizard perspective to subjects in ways that frequently surprised his professors. In herbology, his knowledge of goblin medicinal uses for plants complemented Professor Sprout's more traditional approach. In astronomy, his goblin training in celestial navigation provided insights that impressed even the stern Professor Sinistra. Potions proved particularly interesting. Professor Snape had clearly expected to dislike him, beginning their first class with a series of rapid-fire questions clearly designed to embarrass. "Potter!" he snapped suddenly. "What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Depending on the preparation method, either the draft of living death or, using goblin techniques, a healing potion for severe magical exhaustion," Harnack answered calmly. Snape's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar? The stomach of a goat is the standard wizard source. Goblins prefer those from mountain goats specifically, as the mineral content of their diet enhances the bezoar's efficacy." A muscle twitched in Snape's jaw. "What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "They're the same plant, also known as aconite. Though goblin herbalists distinguish between 7 subspecies, each with different magical properties." The potions master stared at Harnack for a long moment before addressing the class at large. "Well? Why aren't you all copying that down?" Throughout that first lesson, Snape watched Harnack with an unreadable expression as he prepared his potion with the methodical precision his goblin training had instilled. When Harnack produced a perfect boil-curing potion, Snape merely nodded curtly rather than offering the praise he'd given Malfoy for similar results. Yet in subsequent classes, Snape's hostility gradually gave way to a grudging respect for Harnack's skills. By the 3rd week, he was even occasionally asking Harnack to demonstrate goblin preparation techniques that differed from wizard methods, though always with the caveat that, while Potter's unusual background offers some alternative approaches, you will be tested on the standard methods described in your textbooks. Socially, Harnack's integration proved more complex. His Ravenclaw housemates, after their initial curiosity, came to appreciate his quiet intelligence and willingness to help with difficult assignments. Terry Boot and Anthony Goldstein became particularly friendly, often joining him for study sessions in the library. "The way you organized those star charts for astronomy was brilliant," Terry commented one evening as they worked together. "Where did you learn that system?" "Goblin navigators use the stars to map underground pathways," Harnack explained. "They've refined their charting methods over centuries." "Do you think you could teach me?" Terry asked eagerly. "My charts are always a mess." "Of course," Harnack agreed, pleased by the genuine interest in goblin knowledge rather than mere curiosity about his unusual background. Beyond Ravenclaw, Harnack maintained connections in other houses as well, following Gornick's advice to build diverse alliances. Hermione Granger from Gryffindor became a regular study partner, her prodigious reading complementing Harnack's practical knowledge. Ron Weasley, while less academically inclined, offered friendship based on their train-ride connection and insights into wizard family dynamics that Harnack found valuable. Even in Slytherin, Harnack established cautious communication channels. Draco Malfoy, while publicly maintaining a superior attitude toward Potter and his goblin habits, occasionally engaged him in substantive conversations when others weren't watching. "My father says the goblins have investment strategies wizards haven't matched," Malfoy commented during one such exchange in the library. "Is that true? The nation's approach to finance differs significantly from wizard methods," Harnack acknowledged. "We take longer perspectives, often planning decades or centuries ahead." "Interesting." Malfoy's expression was calculating. "Perhaps we could discuss this further sometime." Not all interactions were so positive, however. A segment of the student population viewed Harnack's goblin connections with suspicion or outright prejudice. Comments about half-breed loyalties and creature sympathizer occasionally reached his ears, though rarely directly to his face. His composed demeanor and reputation for both magical skill and physical training demonstrated when he effortlessly dodged a tripping jinx in a crowded hallway, moving with goblin-trained reflexes, discouraged most from overt confrontation. Among the staff, responses varied as well. Flitwick, himself part goblin, took particular interest in Harnack's progress, often inviting him for tea to discuss how goblin magical theory might complement Charm's work. McGonagall remained professionally neutral but fair, acknowledging his skills without favoritism. Snape maintained his complex attitude of grudging respect mixed with personal dislike, for reasons Harnack still didn't fully understand. It was Quirrell who continued to concern him most. Each defense class brought the same strange pain when the professor turned away, and Harnack began to notice other oddities. Quirrell's stuttering sometimes vanished when he grew angry, only to return when he noticed students watching. He frequently disappeared from the castle at night, according to the Ravenclaw ghost who mentioned seeing him heading toward the Forbidden Forest after curfew. Most concerning was an incident during the third week of term. Harnack had been practicing goblin meditation techniques in a quiet corner of the library when he overheard Quirrell in the next aisle, apparently arguing with himself. And not yet. The professor's familiar stutter came through the bookshelves. We must be certain first. Then, chillingly, a second voice responded, high, cold, and somehow emanating from Quirrell himself. Fool! Time grows short. The protections must be assessed. Why, yes, master. But the bee-boy complicates matters. His G-goblin training makes him more observant than we anticipated. The boy is irrelevant until we secure the stone. Focus on your task, Quirrell. Harnack had frozen, barely breathing, as the conversation continued briefly before Quirrell moved away. That night, he reported the incident to Gornick via the communication mirror. This confirms our suspicions, his father said grimly after hearing the account. The parasite in your scar responds to the second presence within Quirrell. The implications are deeply concerning. You believe it's Voldemort? Harnack stated rather than asked. They had discussed this possibility before. It fits the profile. A disembodied presence requiring a host. Seeking something hidden at Hogwarts. This stone they mentioned. Gornick's expression was grave. The nation's intelligence suggests Dumbledore recently moved the Philosopher's Stone from Gringotts to Hogwarts for safekeeping. The third-floor corridor that's off-limits. Harnack realized. It must house the protections for the stone. Likely so. This information must be handled with extreme caution, my son. If Voldemort has indeed possessed Quirrell, you are in proximity to the wizard who murdered your birth parents and attempted to kill you. What should I do? Harnack asked, his goblin training asserting itself. In a tactical situation, clear objectives were essential. Observe. Document. Report. Do not confront directly. You lack the experience to face such an enemy. Gornick's expression softened slightly. Your safety remains our priority, Harnack. The nation would remove you from Hogwarts if necessary. I understand, but I think I can be more valuable by remaining. Harnack argued carefully. I have access and observations that could help prevent Voldemort from obtaining the stone. Gornick studied him for a long moment before nodding. A valid strategic assessment. Continue your observations, but exercise extreme caution. Share nothing of this with other students. The director will inform certain contacts within the Ministry of our suspicions, though without revealing their source. And Dumbledore? Harnack asked. Should I tell him what I've overheard? A complex question. Gornick frowned thoughtfully. Dumbledore likely has his own suspicions about Quirrell. He may even be using the stone as bait to draw Voldemort into the open. Yet he has not acted decisively to remove the threat from proximity to students, which suggests either limited evidence or a larger strategy we don't fully understand. After consideration, they agreed that Harnack would continue gathering information before approaching Dumbledore directly, unless the situation escalated to immediate danger. As autumn deepened at Hogwarts, Harnack's days fell into a rhythm. Classes and studies occupied most of his time, but he also maintained regular communication with Gringotts, practiced both goblin and wizard magic in private, and cultivated his network of connections throughout the school. Halloween brought the first major disruption to this routine. The feast was in full swing, the great hall decorated with live bats and giant pumpkins grown by Hagrid, when Professor Quirrell came sprinting into the hall, turban askew and terror on his face. Troll, in the dungeons, thought you ought to know. He then sank to the floor in a dead faint. The hall erupted in panic until Dumbledore shot purple firecrackers from his wand to restore silence. Prefects, lead your houses back to the dormitories immediately. As the Ravenclaw prefects gathered their students, Harnack overheard Ron Weasley telling his brother, Hermione doesn't know about the troll. She's been in the bathroom crying all afternoon. Harnack made a split-second decision. As the Ravenclaws headed toward their tower, he slipped away from the group, moving with the goblin stealth he practiced for years. Finding Ron in the crowd of Gryffindors, he pulled him aside. "Where's Hermione exactly?" Ron jumped. "Blimey, Harry, Harnack, you scared me. She's in the girls' bathroom on the first floor. Parvati said something upset her during charms. We need to warn her about the troll," Harnack said decisively. "Come on." "But the prefect said, tactical assessment," Harnack interrupted, using goblin terminology without thinking. "Greater risk to Hermione alone than to us moving with awareness. Let's go." They hurried down a side corridor, moving quietly to avoid professors who might send them back to their dormitories. As they turned a corner, they caught a whiff of a foul stench, a mixture of old socks and public toilets that could only be the troll. And then they saw it, 12 feet tall, granite-gray skin, a lumpy body like boulders with a small bald head perched on top. It was dragging a huge wooden club along the floor, headed directly for the girls' bathroom. "It's left the dungeons," Ron whispered unnecessarily, face pale. Harnack assessed the situation with goblin tactical precision. The troll was between them and Hermione. Direct confrontation would be foolish. 2 first-years against a full-grown mountain troll had poor odds of success. But they needed to warn Hermione before the troll reached her. "Distraction," he murmured to Ron. "I'll get to Hermione. You make noise from that end of the corridor, then run." "Are you mental?" Ron hissed. "Do you have a better plan?" Ron grimaced but shook his head. "Fine. But be quick." While Ron moved to position, Harnack slipped into a nearby classroom, exiting through its second door that would allow him to approach the bathroom from another angle. Years of moving through Gringotts' complex architecture had given him an intuitive understanding of spatial navigation. He heard Ron shout and begin throwing debris at the far end of the corridor, drawing the troll's attention. Using the distraction, Harnack moved swiftly to the bathroom door, slipping inside to find Hermione emerging from a stall, eyes red from crying. "Harnack? What are you, troll?" "In the corridor." "Coming this way," he interrupted tersely. "We need to move. Now." Hermione's eyes widened in fear, but before they could exit, the bathroom door banged open as the troll lumbered in, apparently having lost interest in Ron's distraction. It spotted them and let out a roar, raising its club. Goblin battle training took over. "Separate!" Harnack shouted to Hermione. "Multiple targets confuse it." He dove one direction as Hermione scrambled the other. The troll's club smashed into the stalls where they'd been standing seconds before, sending splinters of wood flying everywhere. "Hermione! Under the sinks!" Harnack called, calculating angles rapidly. The confined space limited their options, but the sinks might provide momentary shelter. As Hermione crawled under the nearest sink, the bathroom door burst open again, Ron returning, wand drawn though his hand shook visibly. "Distracted again," Harnack ordered, drawing his own wand. His mind raced through his options. First-year spells weren't designed for combat against magical creatures, but Goblin tactical training emphasized using available resources creatively. Ron began throwing broken pieces of wood at the troll, keeping its attention divided while Harnack circled behind it. The creature roared in confusion, swinging its club wildly. "The club!" Hermione suddenly shouted from under the sink. "Use Wingardium Leviosa!" It was brilliant. The levitation charm was one of the few spells they practiced enough to use reliably under pressure. Ron, being closer, pointed his wand at the troll's weapon just as it prepared to swing again. "Wingardium Leviosa!" he shouted. The club flew from the troll's grasp, rising high into the air, turned slowly over, and dropped, with a sickening crack, onto its owner's head. The troll swayed on the spot and then fell flat on its face with a thud that made the whole room tremble. Harnack moved quickly to Hermione, helping her from under the sink while keeping his wand trained on the fallen troll. "Is it dead?" she asked shakily. "Just knocked out," Harnack assessed, checking its pulse in the goblin manner. "Trolls have thick skulls. It would take more than that to kill one." What in Merlin's name is going on here? All three turned to find Professors McGonagall, Snape, and Quirrell standing in the doorway. McGonagall looked furious, Snape calculating, and Quirrell seemed close to fainting at the sight of the unconscious troll. What were you thinking? McGonagall demanded, cold fury in her voice. You're lucky you weren't killed. Why aren't you in your dormitories? Hermione, to Harnack's surprise, spoke up immediately. Please, Professor McGonagall, they were looking for me. I went looking for the troll because I thought I could deal with it on my own, you know, because I've read all about them. It was such an obvious lie that Harnack had to control his expression. Hermione Granger, admitting to breaking rules and claiming arrogance she didn't possess? For them? If they hadn't found me, I'd be dead now, she continued. Harnack told me to hide while Ron knocked it out with its own club. They didn't have time to go and fetch anyone. It was about to finish me off when they arrived. McGonagall's eyes narrowed slightly, suggesting she didn't entirely believe this account, but she addressed them sternly nonetheless. Miss Granger, foolish girl, how could you think of tackling a mountain troll on your own? As Hermione hung her head, McGonagall turned to Ron and Harnack. Well, I still say you were lucky, but not many first years could have taken on a full-grown mountain troll. 5 points to Gryffindor, Mr. Weasley, for sheer dumb luck. And 5 to Ravenclaw, Mr. Potter, for quick thinking under pressure. As they were dismissed to return to their dormitories, Harnack noticed Snape watching him with an unreadable expression. The potions master's robes were torn near the floor, and there appeared to be blood on his leg, which he was carefully concealing from view. Filing this observation away for later consideration, Harnack parted ways with Ron and Hermione, but not before all three exchanged looks of shared understanding. Some experiences forge connections that transcend house divisions and cultural differences. Facing a 12-foot mountain troll together was apparently one of them. The troll incident marked a turning point in Harnack's Hogwarts experience. His friendship with Ron and Hermione solidified into something deeper than casual acquaintance. Despite being in different houses with different schedules, they began meeting regularly in the library or empty classrooms, initially to study but increasingly to discuss the strange occurrences at Hogwarts. Snape was limping after Halloween, Ron pointed out during one such meeting in mid-November. And I overheard him telling Filch that how are you supposed to keep your eyes on all 3 heads at once? 3 heads has to be a reference to a Cerberus, which would make sense as one of the protections for the Philosopher's Stone, Hermione added, having been brought into their confidence regarding Harnack's suspicions. A multi-layered security system would be logical for something so valuable. The question remains, is Quirrell working with Snape, or are they working at cross purposes? Harnack mused. Snape doesn't trust Quirrell, that much is evident from how he watches him during meals. Maybe they're both after the stone, Ron suggested. Possible, but unlikely, Harnack replied, applying Goblin analytical methods to the problem. Snape has had years of access to Hogwarts. Why would he wait until this specific year, when the stone was brought here? No, I think he suspects Quirrell, same as we do. Through careful observation and occasional eavesdropping, they pieced together more information about the stone's protections. Beyond the Cerberus, which Hagrid inadvertently confirmed was named Fluffy, and belonged to him, they deduced that several professors had contributed obstacles. Sprout likely provided something botanical, Flitwick some charm work, McGonagall probably a transfiguration challenge, and Snape almost certainly a potion puzzle. Quirrell himself would have added something too, Hermione reasoned. Perhaps something involving dark creatures, since that's supposedly his specialty. And Dumbledore would have created the final protection, Harnack added. Something uniquely powerful, given his reputation. Their investigations continued alongside regular studies, with Harnack maintaining his excellent academic performance while providing regular reports to Gornick via the communication mirror. The nation's intelligence networks had confirmed their suspicions about the stone, though Gornick urged continued caution. Director Ragnock has shared certain concerns with selected ministry contacts, he informed Harnack during one such communication. But without direct evidence of Voldemort's presence, They're reluctant to act against the Hogwarts professor. Politics, Harnack observed wryly. Indeed. Gornick's expression was grim. The wizard government remains as inefficient as ever. Our best strategy continues to be vigilance and information gathering. As winter settled over the castle, another dimension of Hogwarts life emerged: Quidditch. Though Harnack had no personal interest in playing, Goblin sports emphasized different skills entirely. He attended Ravenclaw's matches to support his house, finding the tactical elements of the game intellectually interesting if not emotionally engaging. It was during the Gryffindor vs. Slytherin match in November that another incident occurred. Harnack was sitting with his Ravenclaw classmates when he noticed Harry's broomstick, a Nimbus 2000, begin to buck and swerve erratically, as if trying to throw him off. "Someone's jinxing the broom," he murmured to Terry Boot beside him, scanning the stands with sharp eyes. Both Snape and Quirrell were maintaining unwavering eye contact with the struggling broom, muttering continuously. "Jinxing or counter-jinxing?" Terry asked, following his gaze. "Difficult to determine from here," Harnack admitted. Before he could decide on a course of action, he spotted Hermione moving through the stands toward the teachers' section. Moments later, blue flames erupted from Snape's robes, breaking both professors' concentration. Harry's broom stabilized immediately, allowing him to complete a spectacular catch of the snitch, nearly swallowing it in the process. Afterward, meeting with Ron and Hermione near Hagrid's hut, they debated what had happened. "It was Snape," Ron insisted. "Hermione saw him muttering and not blinking, just like you're supposed to do when casting a jinx. But Quirrell was doing the same thing," Harnack pointed out. "And my scar prickled during the incident, which has only previously happened around Quirrell." "Are you suggesting Professor Quirrell tried to kill Harry?" Hermione asked incredulously. "But he's so harmless." "Appearances can be deceiving," Harnack replied, thinking of how Goblin culture valued actions over impressions. "Quirrell's stuttering comes and goes when he thinks no one is paying attention. And he frequently visits the third-floor corridor at night." "How do you know that?" Ron demanded. "I have my methods," Harnack answered cryptically, not wanting to explain how he sometimes practiced Goblin stealth techniques by moving through the castle after curfew. "The point is, we shouldn't assume Snape is the only possible suspect simply because he's unpleasant." These discussions continued through December, even as the castle transformed for Christmas. Harnack had planned to return to Gringotts for the holiday, but an urgent message from Gornick changed those plans. "The nation has received credible intelligence that Voldemort may attempt to access the stone during the reduced holiday staffing," his father explained via the mirror. "Director Ragnarok believes you are safer remaining at Hogwarts under Dumbledore's direct protection than traveling, even to Gringotts." "You think Voldemort would target me during transit?" Harnack asked. "It's a possibility we cannot dismiss," Gornick replied gravely. "The blood protection that shielded you as an infant has been reinforced by goblin wardings, but it remains strongest within places of concentrated magic like Hogwarts or Gringotts. The journey between would present vulnerability." Though disappointed not to see his father and the nation, Harnack understood the strategic reasoning. He informed McGonagall of his change in plans and found himself one of the few Ravenclaws remaining for the holidays. Ron was staying as well, his parents visiting his brother Charlie in Romania, while Hermione had already departed to spend Christmas with her family. The quiet castle provided new opportunities for research. With fewer students around, Harnack gained access to sections of the library normally too crowded for privacy. He focused particularly on Goblin-Wizard historical relations, finding wizard accounts frustratingly biased but occasionally insightful regarding how miscommunications had exacerbated conflicts. "Most wizard historians completely misunderstand Goblin concepts of ownership," he explained to Ron one snowy afternoon as they sat by the fire in the nearly empty Great Hall. "To Goblins, the creator of an object maintains a spiritual connection to it forever. When wizards purchase Goblin-made items but then pass them down through generations without acknowledging the maker, it's deeply offensive. So all those Goblin rebellions Ben's drones on about were often responses to what Goblins perceived as cultural theft rather than mere greed as wizards claim," Harnack confirmed. though there were certainly political and economic factors as well. Ron considered this, frowning thoughtfully. You know, my dad always says you can't understand another magical being's perspective until you've walked in their shoes. Or worn their hat, or whatever. Harnack smiled slightly. Your father sounds wise. Don't tell him that, his head'll get even bigger. Ron grinned. But yeah, I guess most wizards never bother to learn how goblins see things. Or house elves. Or centaurs. We just assume our way is the right way. A common failing in most societies. Harnack acknowledged. The nation has its own blind spots and prejudices. Really? Like what? Harnack hesitated, balancing his loyalty to the goblin culture against the value of honest exchange. Goblins can be inflexible regarding tradition. Innovations are carefully scrutinized, sometimes rejected for decades before being accepted. And there's a tendency to view all wizards as potentially untrustworthy based on historical conflicts. So they're suspicious of you because you're human? Some were, initially. Harnack admitted. But actions speak louder than blood among goblins. I proved myself through commitment to their values and traditions. Must have been tough, though. Ron observed with surprising insight. Being the only human kid among them. Different, certainly. But they saved my life when wizard protection failed. They gave me a home, family, purpose. Harnack touched the silver pendant beneath his robes. I owe them everything. But you're here now. Ron pointed out. Learning wizard stuff. That counts for something too, right? Harnack nodded slowly. It does. Both worlds have value. Both have flaws. Perhaps that's what I'm meant to understand, that neither has a monopoly on wisdom or rightness. Christmas morning brought unexpected gifts. From Gornick, a set of goblin-crafted enchanted throwing knives that could return to their owner when summoned. For defense only. The accompanying note emphasized. From Ron, a box of chocolate frogs. Everyone should collect the cards. From Hermione, a handsome eagle feather quill enchanted to correct spelling errors as one wrote. Most surprising was an anonymous package containing a fluid, silvery cloth that Harnack immediately recognized from goblin legends. Blimey, that's an invisibility cloak. Ron exclaimed when Harnack showed it to him. They're really rare and valuable. The note with it read simply, Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time it was returned to you. Use it well. Harnack examined the cloak carefully, noting its perfect preservation despite apparent age. This isn't ordinary magic, he observed. Goblin accounts mention artifacts like this, true invisibility garments that never fade or deteriorate with time. Who sent it? Ron asked, examining the note. Dumbledore, most likely, Harnack replied. The handwriting matches documents I've seen. And few others would have had access to my birth father's possessions. That night, after Ron had gone to sleep, Harnack decided to test the cloak. Wrapping it around himself, he slipped from Ravenclaw Tower and began exploring corridors normally off-limits after curfew. The cloak's magic was impressive. Even Mrs. Norris, Filch's unusually perceptive cat, looked directly through him. His wanderings eventually took him to an unused classroom containing nothing but an ornate mirror standing on two clawed feet. Curious, Harnack approached it, noting the inscription carved around the top, Aist stra eruoit ubi cafroit on wosi. I show not your face but your heart's desire. He translated after a moment's thought, recognizing the backward writing. Standing before the mirror, he saw not just his own reflection but a scene of striking clarity. He stood between two groups, goblins on one side, wizards on the other. Gornick was there, alongside Ragnock and other members of the nation. On the wizard side stood figures he recognized from photographs, James and Lily Potter, smiling proudly. Both groups were not separated but intermingled, speaking together, sharing knowledge. And at the center, Harnack himself wore robes that combined both culture symbols, a bridge between worlds. A powerful artifact, is it not? Harnack turned sharply to find Dumbledore sitting at a desk in the corner, apparently having been there all along despite Harnack's careful check of the room upon entering. Headmaster, he acknowledged, quickly regaining composure. Yes, it shows compelling visions. And what does Harry Potter, raised as Harnack, son of Gornick, see in the mirror of Aist? Dumbledore asked gently. Harnack considered whether to share the truth, then decided honesty served his purposes. Harmony between my two heritages. Integration rather than division. A noble desire, Dumbledore observed, moving to stand beside him. Many would see only power, or lost loved ones, or adoration. Your vision speaks to a wisdom beyond your years. The mirror shows only possibilities, not certainties. Harnack noted, applying goblin pragmatism to the magical artifact. Beautiful, but potentially dangerous if one became fixated on the vision. Precisely. Dumbledore looked impressed. The happiest man on earth would look in this mirror and see only himself, exactly as he is. But for most, it becomes a trap, showing neither knowledge nor truth, only the deepest, most desperate desires of our hearts. You're moving it, Harnack guessed, noting subtle preparation marks on the floor. Indeed. Men have wasted away before it, entranced by what they saw, or been driven mad, not knowing if what it shows is real or even possible. Dumbledore studied Harnack with renewed interest. It's remarkable that you recognize its danger so clearly. Goblin education emphasizes critical assessment of magical artifacts. Harnack explained. Beauty and power often mask peril. A lesson many wizards would do well to learn. Dumbledore agreed softly. After a pause, he asked, Did you find your Christmas gift useful? So his guess had been correct. The invisibility cloak? Yes, evidently. Though I wonder why you chose now to return it. It belonged to your father. I merely kept it safe until you were ready to appreciate its value, and its potential for mischief. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. Though I suspect your goblin upbringing has given you a more strategic perspective on its uses than James might have had at your age. My father, James, used it often? Oh yes. Primarily for midnight raids on the kitchen and elaborate pranks, if memory serves. Dumbledore smiled at some private recollection. Your mother was less enthusiastic about such applications. This glimpse into his birth parents' personalities was precious to Harnack, who had only fragments of information about them beyond their magical abilities and sacrifice. Thank you for returning it, he said sincerely. It's a meaningful connection to them. You are welcome, Harnack. Dumbledore's use of his goblin name seemed deliberate. Now I suggest you put that admirable cloak back on and get off to bed. Extraordinary artifact or not, you are still subject to school rules about curfew. With a respectful nod, Harnack wrapped the cloak around himself once more and left the classroom, mind full of what he'd seen and learned. The mirror had crystallized something he felt but not fully articulated. His deepest desire wasn't to belong fully to the world, but to help them understand each other better. To be not just a goblin prince or wizard hero, but a bridge between ancient rivals. It was an ambitious vision, perhaps impossible given centuries of mistrust. But as Gornick had taught him, difficult paths often led to the most valuable destinations. The remainder of the school year brought mounting tensions and revelations. After the holidays, Harnack intensified his investigations into both Quirrell and the stone, sharing his findings with Ron and Hermione while continuing to report to Gornick. A breakthrough came in late April when Hagrid inadvertently revealed he had obtained a dragon egg from a mysterious stranger in exchange for information about getting past Fluffy. Play him a bit of music and he falls straight asleep. This confirms our suspicions, Harnack told his friends as they hurried back to the castle. Quirrell, or Voldemort working through him, has been systematically gathering information about each protection. We should tell Dumbledore. Hermione insisted, not for the first time. With what evidence? Harnack countered. We have suspicions and fragments of overheard conversations. Dumbledore already knows something's amiss. That's why he brought the stone here in the first place. But if Quirrell knows how to get past Fluffy now, he still has the other protections to solve. Ron pointed out. And Dumbledore's own enchantment at the end. Their debate became academic days later when they discovered Dumbledore had been called away to the ministry for an emergency, Too convenient to be coincidence. Tonight, Harnack said decisively, meeting Ron and Hermione in an empty classroom. Quirrell will make his move tonight with Dumbledore gone. We need to get to the stone first. Us? Against a fully trained wizard possibly possessed by you-know-who? Ron looked pale. We'll be killed, or worse, expelled, he added, mimicking Hermione's usual priorities. We don't need to defeat him directly, Harnack explained, drawing on Goblin tactical thinking. We just need to alert the right authorities with concrete evidence. If we can document Quirrell's attempt, the Ministry will have to act. After intense discussion, they formed a plan. Harnack would use his invisibility cloak to reach the third-floor corridor. Ron and Hermione would alert Professor McGonagall with a carefully crafted story that would bring her to investigate without revealing their own rule-breaking. If Harnack encountered dangers beyond his abilities, he would retreat and join them. That night, cloaked and moving with goblin stealth, Harnack made his way to the forbidden corridor. The door was already ajar. Quirrell had indeed made his move. Slipping inside, he found Fluffy awake and growling, but a nearby enchanted harp suggested Quirrell had already passed through and was below. Drawing a small flute Hagrid had given him for Christmas, Harnack played a simple melody. The enormous dog's eyes began to droop, and soon it was snoring. Moving quickly, he opened the trapdoor and lowered himself into the darkness below. He landed on something soft, a large plant that immediately began wrapping tendrils around him. Recognizing Devil's Snare from herbology, he relaxed his body completely, allowing himself to sink through to the chamber below rather than struggling and tightening its grip. The next chamber contained flying keys and broomsticks. Having watched enough Quidditch to understand the principles, Harnack mounted a broom and pursued the correct key, an old-fashioned silver one with a bent wing, already damaged from Quirrell's earlier attempt. Beyond that lay a giant wizard's chessboard, the pieces already shattered and cleared from a previous game. Then a troll, larger than the one at Halloween, already unconscious with a bloody gash on its head. Quirrell had been busy. The next chamber contained a logic puzzle with potions and fire blocking both forward and backward paths. The note accompanying it was a riddle that, once solved, would identify which potion allowed safe passage through the black flames ahead and which permitted return through the purple flames behind. Harnack studied the riddle carefully, applying both goblin analytical methods and wizard magical knowledge. After consideration, he identified the smallest bottle as the one to proceed forward. It contained barely a swallow, enough for one person only. The way back held more, but Harnack's instincts told him retreat wasn't the right choice. Not yet. Drinking the potion that would allow him forward, he stepped through the black flames and entered the final chamber. There stood Quirrell, facing a magnificent mirror that Harnack recognized immediately, the mirror of Aist. The professor's back was to him, turban still in place, as he muttered to himself. I see the stone. I'm presenting it to my master, but how do I get it? Is it inside the mirror? Should I break it? Taking advantage of his unnoticed entry, Harnack quickly cast a revealing charm, one of the few spells he mastered wandlessly through goblin training. The magic made visible what ordinary eyes couldn't see, a dark, shadowy presence surrounding Quirrell, concentrated most heavily around his head. Voldemort. The confirmation sent a chill through Harnack, but he maintained his composure, silently documenting what he observed using a dictation quill enchanted to record his whispers to a hidden parchment, evidence for later. Use the boy, came a high, cold voice, the same one Harnack had overheard in the library. He has followed us. Quirrell spun around, the stuttering persona completely gone. Potter! I wondered if I'd be meeting you here. Professor, Harnack acknowledged calmly, mind racing through goblin battle tactics. Direct confrontation against a superior opponent was foolish. Delay and reconnaissance were the priority. Or should I say, vessel of Voldemort? Quirrell's eyes widened slightly. You're well informed for a first year. Clever little goblin child, aren't you? Yes, my master shares my body, has done ever since I met him in Albanian forests. He strengthens me, guides me. Seems more like possession than partnership, Harnack observed, moving slowly to keep the mirror between them. You've lost your autonomy. Silence! Quirrell snapped. What do you know of greater purpose? Now come here and help me with this mirror. Ropes suddenly sprang from Quirrell's wand, binding Harnack tightly. With a gesture, Quirrell levitated him in front of the mirror of Aist. Look in it and tell me what you see, he commanded. Harnack gazed into the mirror, expecting to see his previous vision of harmony between goblins and wizards. Instead, he saw his reflection smile at him, put its hand into its pocket, and pull out a blood-red stone. The reflection winked and put the stone back in its pocket, and as it did so, Harnack felt something heavy drop into his real pocket. Somehow, incredibly, he had gotten the stone. Well? Quirrell demanded impatiently. What do you see? Harnack thought quickly. The truth would endanger him immediately. A complete lie might be detected. Instead, he offered a partial truth. I see myself standing between goblins and wizards, he said. Creating understanding between them. Useless! Quirrell snarled. He lies, came Voldemort's voice. Let me speak to him, face to face. Master, you are not strong enough. I have strength enough for this. To Harnack's horror, Quirrell began unwinding his turban. As the cloth fell away, he was forced to look at the most terrible face he had ever seen, chalk white with glaring red eyes and slits for nostrils, like a snake, attached to the back of Quirrell's head. Harry Potter. It whispered. See what I have become. Mere shadow and vapor. I have form only when I can share another's body, but there have always been those willing to let me into their hearts and minds. Unicorn blood has strengthened me these past weeks, and once I have the elixir of life, I will be able to create a body of my own. As Voldemort spoke, Harnack felt the stone in his pocket grow heavier. His scar burned fiercely, but the goblin containment rituals held, preventing the dark magic from penetrating his mind. Those same rituals now gave him an unexpected advantage, a partial shield against Voldemort's mental influence. You've been well protected by your goblin guardians, Voldemort observed, seeming to sense the magical barriers. They've hidden you from me for years, taught you their secrets, made you something other than what you were meant to be. But no matter. Give me the stone in your pocket, and perhaps I'll let you live. So he knew. Harnack's mind raced for options. The binding ropes limited his movement, but not entirely. Quirrell/Voldemort stood between him and the exit. Direct combat was impossible, but perhaps direct combat wasn't necessary. You killed my parents, Harnack said, stalling while he worked his bound hands toward the hidden throwing knife in his sleeve, one of Gornick's Christmas gifts. Why? They were in my way, Voldemort replied dismissively. As is anyone who opposes Lord Voldemort's rise to power. Your mother need not have died, she was trying to protect you. Now give me the stone, unless you want her sacrifice to be in vain. And if I refuse? Harnack's fingers closed around the knife hilt. Then I shall take it from your corpse. Quirrell lunged forward on Voldemort's command. In one fluid motion, Harnack flicked the throwing knife from his sleeve, slicing through the magical ropes binding his arms. As Quirrell reached for him, he rolled aside, drawing his wand with his now free hand. Stupefy! He shouted, casting one of the few offensive spells he'd secretly practiced. The red jet of light struck Quirrell squarely in the chest, but to Harnack's shock, it merely staggered him rather than rendering him unconscious. Fool! Your first-year spells cannot harm me. Quirrell laughed, raising his own wand. Crucio! Harnack dove behind the mirror, the unforgivable curse missing him by inches. The duel that followed was hopelessly mismatched. A first-year student, however well-trained in goblin methods, against a fully qualified wizard enhanced by Voldemort's power. Yet Harnack had one advantage. His goblin training had emphasized tactical thinking over raw power. He used the chamber's architecture, keeping the mirror between them when possible, using smaller spells to create distractions rather than attempting to overpower his opponent directly. When Quirrell conjured flames to flush him from cover, Harnack used a water-generating charm to create steam, reducing visibility. When Quirrell blasted the mirror to remove his cover, Harnack used the fragments as projectiles, banishing them toward his opponent. Throughout, he was backing steadily toward the exit, knowing his best hope was to escape with the stone and bring reinforcements. But Quirrell, sensing his strategy, cut him off with a wall of fire. "Impressive for a child," Voldemort's cold voice commented. "The goblins taught you well. But futile nonetheless." Cornered now, Harnack faced his opponent directly. Quirrell advanced, hands outstretched to seize him. As those hands closed around his throat, something extraordinary happened. Quirrell screamed in agony, releasing him immediately. "Master! My hands, I cannot touch him, it burns!" Harnack stared in shock at Quirrell's blistering palms, then understood with sudden clarity. "My mother's protection," he murmured. "Her sacrifice still shields me." "Then kill him, fool!" Voldemort shrieked. But Harnack had seen his advantage. As Quirrell raised his wand again, Harnack did the unexpected. He charged forward, leaping at his opponent and pressing his hands against Quirrell's face. The contact was agonizing for them both. Harnack's scar felt like it would split open with pain, while Quirrell screamed as his skin blistered and cracked wherever Harnack touched. Through the pain, Harnack maintained his focus, aware that he couldn't maintain this assault for long. His vision was already darkening at the edges when the chamber door burst open and McGonagall's voice shouted a stunning spell. More voices followed, Flitwick, Snape. But Harnack was already losing consciousness, his last thought a satisfaction that Ron and Hermione had succeeded in their part of the plan. He awoke in the hospital wing, the familiar sensation of healing magic surrounding him. Opening his eyes, Harnack found Dumbledore sitting beside his bed. "Good afternoon, Harnack," the headmaster greeted him. "You've had quite an adventure." Harnack's hand went immediately to his pocket. "The stone is safe," Dumbledore assured him. "Professor McGonagall arrived just in time, thanks to a rather creative tale from Mr. Weasley and Miss Granger about having seen Professor Quirrell heading toward the forbidden corridor, muttering suspiciously to himself. Quirrell? Voldemort? Professor Quirrell did not survive the encounter, I'm afraid. As for Voldemort, he abandoned his host when defeat became certain. He exists still, in a form that is neither fully alive nor truly dead." Harnack absorbed this information, then asked the question that had been forming since he first suspected Voldemort's presence. "He'll try to return again, won't he?" "Yes, I believe he will," Dumbledore said gravely. "There are other ways he might achieve a body, other servants who may aid him." "The prophecy," Harnack said. "That's why he won't stop coming after me, isn't it? Because of whatever it predicted." Dumbledore studied him for a long moment. "You are remarkably well informed." "Yes, the prophecy binds your fates together, though I believe it would be unwise to share its specific contents until you are somewhat older." Harnack nodded, accepting this limitation for now. "What happened with Quirrell when he touched me?" "Your mother died to save you," Dumbledore explained. "If there is one thing Voldemort cannot understand, it is love. He didn't realize that love as powerful as your mother's leaves its own mark, not a scar, no visible sign, but a protection in your very skin. Quirrell, full of hatred, greed, and ambition, sharing his soul with Voldemort, could not touch you for this reason. It was agony to touch a person marked by something so good." It was a very wizard explanation, Harnack thought, emphasizing emotion and sacrifice rather than the precise magical mechanics. Yet he recognized its truth. The goblin containment rituals had worked with this existing protection rather than replacing it, strengthening what Lily Potter's sacrifice had created. "And the stone?" Harnack asked. "What will happen to it now?" "It has been destroyed," Dumbledore replied. "My friend Nicholas Flamel and I have had a little chat, and agreed it's all for the best. But then he and his wife will die. They have enough elixir stored to set their affairs in order, and then, yes, they will die." Dumbledore smiled. "To one as young as you, I'm sure it seems incredible, but to Nicholas and Perenelle, it really is like going to bed after a very, very long day. After all, to the well-organized mind, death is but the next great adventure." There was wisdom in this perspective that resonated with goblin views on mortality, though goblins expressed it differently. focusing on legacy and honor rather than spiritual journey. Harnack found himself appreciating how the different philosophical traditions sometimes reach similar conclusions through different paths. "One more question, if I may," Harnack said. "How did I get the stone from the mirror?" "Ah, now, that was one of my more brilliant ideas," Dumbledore said, eyes twinkling. "Only one who wanted to find the stone, find it, but not use it, would be able to get it. Otherwise, they would just see themselves making gold or drinking the elixir of life." "Clever," Harnack acknowledged, using desire itself as both lock and key. Their conversation continued briefly, touching on Harnack's confrontation with Quirrell and the assistance Ron and Hermione had provided. Dumbledore seemed particularly interested in how Harnack had applied goblin tactical thinking to a wizard duel, commenting that creativity in combat often surpasses raw power. Before leaving, the headmaster paused. "Your dual heritage gives you unique strengths, Harnack. Strengths that may prove essential in the challenges that lie ahead. I hope you will continue to draw wisdom from both your worlds." "That's my intention, headmaster." After Dumbledore departed, Madame Pomfrey allowed Ron and Hermione to visit briefly. They recounted their part in the events, how they'd constructed a story believable enough to send McGonagall investigating without revealing their own involvement, how they'd waited anxiously for news, how the whole school now buzzed with rumors about what had happened beneath the trapdoor. "Everyone's talking about it," Ron reported, "though nobody knows exactly what happened. All sorts of mad stories going around, that you fought Quirrell with goblin battle magic, that you turned him to gold with a touch. The teachers aren't confirming anything," Hermione added. "But Professor Flitwick looked positively bursting with pride when your name was mentioned at breakfast." When they'd gone, Harnack used his communication mirror to contact Gornick, providing a full report of what had transpired. His father's expression grew increasingly grave as the account proceeded. "You face Voldemort directly," Gornick said when he'd finished. "The containment rituals protected you, but not completely. This concerns me greatly. The protection my birth mother provided proved more effective," Harnack acknowledged. "It prevented him from touching me physically. A powerful sacrifice magic." Gornick nodded. "One the nation respects. Still, you took an immense risk confronting him alone. The plan was to gather evidence, not engage directly." "Circumstances forced my hand," Harnack explained. "But I understand your concern, Father. It won't happen again." Gornick's expression softened slightly. "You acted with courage and tactical wisdom, my son. The nation will be proud of your actions, though concerned for the risks taken. Director Ragnarok has already been informed of events through our ministry contacts." They spoke at length about the implications, Voldemort's continued existence, the potential for future confrontations, the need for additional training to prepare Harnack for what might come. Finally, Gornick addressed a more immediate matter. "You'll return to Gringotts for the summer as planned," he said. "The director has authorized additional security for your journey. And you'll begin advanced combat training once your current academic year concludes." "I welcome it," Harnack replied sincerely. While he had acquitted himself reasonably well against Quirrell, the encounter had exposed gaps in his practical magical defense that needed addressing. 3 days later, Harnack was released from the hospital wing in time for the end-of-year feast. The Great Hall was decked in Slytherin colors of green and silver to celebrate their winning the House Cup. Harnack took his place at the Ravenclaw table amid curious stares and whispered questions from classmates who'd heard various exaggerated accounts of his adventure. Dumbledore arrived moments later, and the babble died away. "Another year gone," he announced cheerfully. "And now, as I understand it, the House Cup needs awarding, and the points stand thus. In 4th place, Gryffindor with 312 points. In 3rd, Hufflepuff with 352. Ravenclaw has 426, and Slytherin, 472. Cheers erupted from the Slytherin table. Harnack applauded politely, Goblin training emphasizing respect for achievements even among rivals. Yes, well done, Slytherin, said Dumbledore. However, recent events must be taken into account. I have some last-minute points to award. The room went very still. Harnack's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing what might be coming. First, to Mr. Ronald Weasley, for the best played game of chess Hogwarts has seen in many years, I award Gryffindor House 50 points. The Gryffindor table erupted in cheers. Percy Weasley could be heard telling other prefects, "My brother, you know! My youngest brother! Got past McGonagall's giant chess set!" When silence returned, Dumbledore continued. Second, to Miss Hermione Granger, for the use of cool logic in the face of fire, I award Gryffindor House 50 points. Hermione buried her face in her arms, and Harnack suspected she had burst into tears. Gryffindors up and down the table were beside themselves. They were 100 points up. Third, to Mr. Harry Potter. Dumbledore paused as the room went deadly quiet. For pure nerve and outstanding courage, and for building bridges between magical traditions long separated, I award Ravenclaw House 60 points. The Ravenclaw table exploded with excitement. The additional points put them in second place, just behind Slytherin. Harnack accepted his housemates' congratulations with composed nods, though inwardly he felt conflicted about being rewarded for what had been, in many ways, a necessary response to a threat rather than a deliberate act of heroism. Then Dumbledore raised his hand again, and the room gradually fell silent. "There are all kinds of courage," he said, smiling. "It takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to our enemies, but just as much to stand up to our friends. I therefore award 10 points to Mr. Neville Longbottom." The Great Hall erupted in the loudest cheer yet, because Dumbledore's additional points to Neville had brought Gryffindor into a tie with Slytherin for the House Cup. The headmaster raised his hand again for silence. "And finally," he said, "for exceptional loyalty and resourcefulness in alerting staff to danger, another 10 points to Gryffindor." The Gryffindor table went berserk as they realized they'd won the cup. Harnack glanced toward the Slytherin table, noting the shock and anger on faces there, particularly Draco Malfoy's. From a Goblin perspective, Dumbledore's last-minute point adjustments seemed questionably fair, though the achievements themselves were certainly worthy of recognition. As the decorations changed from green and silver to red and gold, Harnack caught Ron and Hermione's eyes across the hall, offering them a small smile and nod of acknowledgement. They had all played their parts in preventing Voldemort from returning, each contributing unique strengths to the effort. The feast that followed was memorable, loud, joyous, and filled with the sense of term's end and summer's promise. As Harnack participated in the celebrations with his Ravenclaw housemates, he reflected on how much had changed since his arrival 9 months earlier. He had entered Hogwarts as something unique, the goblin-raised boy who lived, uncertain how he would be received or whether he could successfully navigate the wizard world while honoring his goblin upbringing. He would leave having begun to forge a path that truly integrated both heritages, having made friends across house boundaries, having demonstrated to both students and staff that goblin values and wizard magic could complement rather than oppose each other. There was still prejudice to overcome, still misconceptions to address, still bridges to build, but the foundation had been laid. As the Hogwarts Express carried them back toward London the next day, Harnack sat with Ron and Hermione, discussing their plans for the summer. "You'll write, won't you?" Hermione asked anxiously. "Both of you?" "Of course," Ron assured her. "Though Harnack might have trouble, don't goblins live underground? Can owls even reach you there?" "Gringotts has sophisticated mail systems," Harnack explained with a smile. "Hedwig will have no difficulty finding me. And yes, I'll write regularly." "And you'll be back next year?" Ron asked, the question revealing a lingering concern that Harnack's goblin family might decide Hogwarts was too dangerous after the Quirrell incident. "Definitely," Harnack confirmed. "Though I'll be undertaking additional training over the summer. The nation feels I should be better prepared for whatever comes next." "You think he'll try again, don't you?" Hermione asked quietly. "Voldemort." Harnack nodded soberly. "He hasn't given up his quest to return. And the prophecy still binds us. This was just the first confrontation of many, I suspect." "Well, he'll have to get through us too next time," Ron said firmly. "All of us." As the train pulled into platform 9 3/4, Harnack gathered his belongings, including Hedwig in her cage. Through the window, he could see Gornik waiting, flanked by 2 goblin guards in disguise form, visible to him through their magic but appearing as ordinary humans to most observers. "That's my father," he told Ron and Hermione, pointing. "Would you like to meet him?" Their expressions, Ron's nervousness, Hermione's barely contained curiosity, reminded him how unusual this crossing of worlds remained. Yet they both nodded, following him off the train. As Harnack approached Gornik, he shifted smoothly from the wizard student role he'd inhabited for the past year to the goblin prince returning home, offering the formal clan greeting with perfect composure. Then, in a deliberate bridging of his 2 worlds, he introduced his friends. "Father, may I present Hermione Granger and Ronald Weasley, who stood with me against Voldemort. My friends, this is Healer Gornik, my father." Gornik studied them with sharp eyes before offering a slight bow, a significant honor from a goblin to young wizards. "The nation acknowledges your loyalty to our prince," he said formally. "You are welcome in our hall should you ever visit." Ron's eyes widened at what he recognized as an extraordinary invitation, while Hermione practically vibrated with questions she was visibly restraining out of politeness. "It's an honor to meet you, sir," she managed instead. "Harnack has taught us so much about goblin culture and magic. It's fascinating how different traditions approach similar problems with completely different perspectives but equally valid solutions." A flicker of approval crossed Gornik's face. "Indeed, Miss Granger. Perhaps someday our peoples will recognize how much we might learn from each other." After final goodbyes and promises to write, Harnack departed with Gornik and the guards, leaving the wizard world behind temporarily to return to the goblin nation that had saved and raised him. As they passed through the barrier between platforms, moving from the magical to the mundane world, he reflected on how he himself had become a similar kind of passage, a bridge between ancient traditions, carrying elements of both. It wouldn't be an easy path. Voldemort's return remained a looming threat. Prejudices on both sides ran deep. The weight of prophecy and expectation still rested on his shoulders. But he was neither just Harry Potter nor only Harnack's son of Gornik. He was both, and that unique perspective might prove to be his greatest strength in the challenges ahead. With that thought, he stepped fully into the Muggle world, ready to return to Gringotts and prepare for whatever his second year at Hogwarts might bring. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.